With that, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Balte,
Present?
Vice Chair Thompson, absent. Board Member Hirsch,
Present.
Board Member Lee,
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is oral communications. Do we have any member of the public who wishes to speak towards any item not on our agenda? Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Currently, there are no raised hands.
Very well. Next item on is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Jody, could you take us through that, please?
Yes, we do have a few changes this time around. The study session on ex parte communications is going to be continued to the next hearing. And then on Monday, we had added the ARB annual report. And that draft letter was sent out to the board for your review and discussion today. That concludes changes.
Just so the public knows, we also have comments from Board Member Thompson on each project, which we'll read into the record at the start of the discussion for each project.
Yes.
Next item is city official reports. Anything, Jody, again, from staff on that?
Yes, Veronica had it up and she'll bring that up again. Perfect. So we have, I think what was shown on here is the Hamilton project, which I believe is delayed, but Pope Chaucer Bridge should still be coming to you on December 17th. We would also have the ex parte communications, and then we would also have the elections for chair and vice chair, because the idea is that council will vote on new board members on the 14th, I believe. So then we could do chair and vice chair afterwards.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. With that, we're ready to move on to our action items. First item is item number 2, public hearing, quasi-judicial for 3585 El Camino Real, consideration of a major architecture review to allow the demolition of an 800 square foot commercial building and the construction of a new 3-story mixed-use project, including 2,400 square feet of office space and 3 residential units. This is a housing incentive program project with a variance request to deviate from the parking lot shading requirement. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, good morning. Let me just get that.
Oh, before we do that, I'd like to ask if we have any disclosures from any members of the board. Before you start, Sheldon. Alex, any disclosures?
No.
David, disclosures?
None.
Grace, disclosures?
None, except for that I looked at the materials board at City Hall.
Okay, I will disclose that I did spend some time visiting the site and also looking at the material board. Okay, Dave, Sheldon, please go ahead.
Great, thank you for the introduction.
And Sheldon.
Oh,
Yes, I disclosed that I also, David here, visited the site again, and also the board at City Hall.
Oh, thank you, David. Okay.
okay, great. So thank you. This is the 3rd time for this project before you, and just what we're going to be talking about today. It's a formal review of a mixed-use project to give a little background of how we got here, and then some of the changes that the applicant did at the recommendation of the ARB, and then our recommendation. So the project's located on 0.14 acres. It's a corner lot there at El Camino Real and Matadero Avenue. It's a new 3-story mixed-use building, zoned CN, neighborhood commercial. And the project uses the housing incentive program. This will probably be the first project to be approved. You may be aware of another project on San Antonio, but that one needs the ordinance to be in effect. So this will probably likely be the first one to get approval of this using this incentive program. Requests are for architectural review. The variance has been withdrawn because it's no longer necessary, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And recommendation is for the ARB to recommend approval to the director. A bit of background, the project has been before the ARB twice before, in October of 2019 and recently in May 2020. And most recently, the ARB did provide the following recommendations and suggestions. Those were to revise the shading exhibit, considering all the trees that affect the shading for the parking lot area, including the street trees. Review the size of a second floor, 1-bedroom unit. The ARB thought that was a large unit, maybe too big. And then to demonstrate more about the base, middle, and top to be consistent with the South El Camino Real guidelines, in particular, the top portion of the building. To consider adding a landscape professional to the team. Also to evaluate basement parking possibility, and to update materials to match the plans. A little bit of site context. The site is again a corner lot. It also has an alley to the rear and some overhead utilities. The site is constrained in that manner with these streets. There's also residential right behind along the alley. It's a RM30 site. And then in general, you have a curb cut there in the front. Those would be eliminated as part of this development project. A little more about the site context here. The area is an area that has a lot more older development, single to 2-story types of development. You can see that there's another Quonset hut there across the street from the project. There's one also on the site that's partially dismantled. The site was a automobile repair area and was the location of remediation in the past for hazardous materials that has been given now closure for the site by the county and oversight agencies. So this area, as you can see, is just an area maybe that's going to be in transition over the period of time. A little bit about the housing incentive program is for residential mixed-use projects along El Camino Real, the C under CS. The director may waive requirements if they're consistent with the architectural review findings. So for the, excuse me, the FAR maximum is not to exceed 1.5 to 1. The base CN in comparison is 1.0, and the maximum lot coverage can be completely waived, whereas the base CN allows up to 50%. So this housing incentive program is intended to produce more housing as an incentive. For the proposed project, we're looking at a 3-story mixed-use building. The applicant has revised the project and proposes the following. There was some adjustment to the office square footage upward slightly. There's also adjusted the square footage of residential units down slightly, making that 1 large bedroom unit on the second floor a 2-bedroom unit. Also, the applicant added a parapet to address the top issue, and also revised the landscape plan. So the project does include 0.41 FAR for commercial space and 3 residential units that have 0.71 FAR. So the total FAR is 1.12, so just slightly over what would otherwise be allowed, but still under the maximums for the HIP. And the maximum lot coverage is 60%, which is a little over what otherwise the base would be. Some notable development standards for the district is that there's a 12-foot effective sidewalk for El Camino Real. So off the property line is actually about a 5-foot setback, but in total from the faces of curb for this, there's a 12-foot sidewalk. There's also a 5-foot setback for the street along Matadero. That does kind of push the property development envelope in a little bit towards the property. And then you have the open space coverage is 35%, as well as the parking lot shade canopy is 50%. There's also the South El Camino Real guidelines that are applicable to the project. And some of those are 75% build to for the El Camino Real frontage, 50% build to for the side street. And that encourages projects to take access from the side street. And the orientation of the building is also towards El Camino Real and includes an articulated base, body, and roof. This shows sort of the evolution of the project since we first saw it back in October 2019 through today. Very slight, very small changes. The board had some specific recommendations, but nothing about really changing the building or site plan that drastically. So that's why you don't see a lot of changes from the first iteration. But this is from El Camino Real. And you can see slightly that Matadero elevation as well. The main changes here would be planters at the ground level, kind of giving a little more base to the project. And then the parapet at the top there, where they're using an aluminum, a brushed aluminum cladding. And then more along Matadero and the alley side, here you probably see a little more changing, but it's again the parapet and some of the landscaping along the alleyway has changed as they've changed from the Japanese maples to the Western redbud. It might be easier to see more of the changes here on the site plan. It's evolved more, especially with the parking area in the back. There was an addition of a landscape area, so the parking was reduced in the machine, although overall the project still meets the requirements. And so you can see as the project has evolved, the back part of the property towards the alley, there's more screening and more landscaping, giving some buffer towards the residences across the alley. Here you can see the project is 1 story taller than the adjacent properties, and that's something that is seen to be acceptable in these areas. The first floor or base of the building is consistent with the neighboring buildings, maintain that rhythm and pattern. And then you can see also from Matadero, it's still about the same there, where the properties across the way is a pretty big setback from the alley, and it's also just 1 floor above that. Just going to the elevations and the planters at the base of the building here. This is along El Camino Real. Then you can see where there's concrete frame, glass railings, and 3-form cladding material. The applicant will go a little bit more into their design palette and design intent. Then at the top, you have the brushed aluminum metal cladding for the parapet wall and the perforated aluminum for the mechanical screening. So there's a lot of variety in different materials. We'll have certain slides on those in this presentation. Again, along Matadero continues that same type of palette there. All of this is within 35-foot height limit. And then at the elevation here, you see that pebble wall that's introduced along the rear of the building and the screening of the rear parking lot area. And also, you may be able to see here a little bit of the trellis that's covering the parking spaces in the back, and that has some vines on it as well, trying to achieve that buffering between the property and the alley and the residence away. This is the alley elevation, as I mentioned, with the landscaping, as much as they can do, as it's not shown here, but there are in the picture I showed earlier, the overhead utilities. So these trees, they can't get that tall. They're just going to get chopped by utility services. So the whole goal here in landscaping is to try to soften this elevation from what those residences would see across from the alley. One of the things that had to be addressed previous iterations, having requested a variance, was a parking lot shading. The tree canopy and sizes within a surface parking area shall include tree plantings designed to result in 50% shading of the parking lot surface areas within 15 years. And there are certain criteria and requirements for types of trees that you can plant to achieve that. And what the applicant did, the recommendation of the board is one thing: bring on a landscape professional to have the plans refined, change some of the trees in the back from Japanese maples to Western redbud trees. Also count those London plane trees. They have very wide, large canopies, especially at maturity. So when all this was put together, they did meet the requirement at its 50.3%, just barely made it, but we did double check that. And so no variance is required for this part of the project. The other component here is the base, middle, and top, and this comes into play with being consistent with the South El Camino Real guidelines. The base of the building includes the office space, and this is featuring landscape planters, some exposed concrete column frames with concrete slab and glass walls, and the floor to ceiling height is 13 feet. The middle of the building includes a little more variety here. You've got exposed concrete frames, overhangs for balconies with hanging landscaping. There's some solar screening, as well as the floor to ceiling height here is 9 feet. The top is residential use, and it features an 8-foot setback with a 4-foot overhang of the terrace. It includes three-form cladding and operable windows and doors. And then the very top here includes a 1-foot parapet wall with brushed aluminum cladding and coping. And the very top of the roof includes mechanical equipment screen with perforated aluminum screen. One of the other topics was to look at whether or not you could put the parking underground. There's an attachment that includes some diagrams. These are some different diagrams. So these are more detailed ones. The applicant along the way throughout this project has provided a lot of different iterations for this basement, addressing some of the staff's as well as ARB's comments. But as you look at here, this site is 104 feet by 60 feet. And you have setbacks in the front along El Camino Real that need to be maintained. And those transcend not only at the ground level, but it goes down below ground when you're considering basement development. It also has a 5-foot setback along Matadero. And then what can we do with it? Well, once you lay that out and try to fit, we can really just do a one-way ramp down. That's not the code. And in doing so, when you're making that turn at the bottom of that ramp, it's not possible without going into the setback. So that's another deviation there. You need another deviation to go into the street side yard setback. And then once we figure this out, how to get into here, this area, where do we put the parking? And they put a little example here of some stackers. These stackers, I think, are 9 stackers. It's very difficult to see how this would really fit. Maybe you could orient these a different direction. Then trying to get to the top level, you need to have an elevator and a stairway. They put that in the rear of the property. And then when you get to the surface, you can see how this looks. You actually still need to have a driveway and surface parking. So really, you've just kind of complicated the site more with the alley being the access to the ramp. You still have the trash there. Now there's this other element of a stairwell and elevator. The transformer's still there. So it's very busy in the back. You lose a lot of that landscaping. And you still have the driveway and the parking at top. So we haven't really achieved much by trying to put this below ground. And this is why we determined that it's not a feasible thing to do. And this is just the cross section of what that looks like. Maybe you can put some parking underneath the ramp. It's very limited. You have to put a pit to go down more. So there's just a lot of different things that make this not a feasible solution. Going into the materials here, and the applicant will go a little bit more into this, but just to provide it here, some of the different materials. There's a lot of variety being used throughout the elevations, as well as for the little details here, the glass railings, glass overhangs, and how that's attached to the building. The long-term bicycle parking has some stainless steel panels. There's wood that's being used as well for the project. There's a bench, there's a trellis, the rooftop has a metal as well as the trash enclosure. There's a pebble wall that's being used along the perimeter towards the rear and the alley of the building. And then there's a masonry block wall that's being used for the enclosure, the trash. The mechanical equipment is also screened. You can see how the holes are situated. So it should provide that screening so you won't be able to see the equipment. And the planters are the metal type of planters there. And this is the new material, the aluminum cladding for the parapet wall. And then kind of all the material composed there. And I think there's an updated one that's at City Hall. So some other issues, miscellaneous, the below market rate housing, the project will make an in lieu payment. The mechanical lift parking, there's a condition regarding operations and maintenance. For CEQA, the project required a mitigated negative declaration that circulated earlier in the year. Some of the impacted topics included air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, hazardous materials, and noise. And there were mitigations that were proposed to reduce these impacts to less than significant. So in conclusion, we want the board to conduct a public hearing. The project does respond to the ARB comments. The project is consistent with the architectural review findings. We do want to note that there's the finding number 1 that we just want to make a change there. It's on page 19 of the packet. The sentence right before finding number 2, so it's the last sentence. We need to revise to strike out the last part of that sentence since the project does not require a variance. Project is consistent with the code as proposed. So that staff makes a recommendation to the ARB to review and consider the initial study and mitigate a negative declaration and recommend approval of the project to the Director of Planning and Development Services based on the findings is subject to approval. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. The applicant does have their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your thorough presentation, Sheldon. Do we have any questions for staff from any member of the board? Then Sheldon, I'd like for you to clarify for me, please. On the shading of the parking area, the applicant also has some sort of a trellis structure or trellis and vine combination. Am I right in understanding that the code requires the shading to be from trees?
That's correct. So we did not count that, but we did clarify in our staff report that that does kind of help with some additional shading, but we didn't count the roof overhangs that went into the driveway, nor did we count the covered parking portions.
Okay, and then you have confirmed these calculations to prove the areas meets the 50% requirement. It's a very tight calculation, it seems.
We did confirm it.
Okay, thank you very much. No other questions from me. Again, any other questions from staff, from board members? Okay, then with that, let's have the applicant make a presentation if they would like to. Do we have an applicant present today?
Yes.
Very well. Welcome and good morning. Thank you for your presentation. You'll have 10 minutes to speak to us if you'd like. Go ahead whenever you're ready, please.
Are you able to see my screen?
We are able to see your screen. Please go ahead.
Yep. My name is Pratima Shah. I'm the lead architect on this project. Good morning, Architectural Review Board members, planning staff, Jody and Sheldon. Thank you for reviewing our building design proposal. We appreciate the thorough staff report and detailed presentation by Sheldon. This is our third formal presentation before ARB. We appreciate the review and comments. The revisions made to the design in response to these comments have assisted with building design enhancement. The project site has been vacant and in dilapidated condition for the last 30 years. We, Paloma Architects, together with KSS Management, are proposing a 3-story mixed-use building with office spaces on 1st and 2nd floor and 3 residences on 2nd and 3rd floor. There are 2 double-bedroom units and 1 single-bedroom residential units. As you are familiar with the design proposal, I will focus my presentation on the revisions and responses to ARB comments from previous hearings. First important topic is parking area shading. The revised design proposal has 4 western redbud trees along the alley and 3 London plane trees. These trees provide shading of the parking area and fulfill the requirement of 50% shading with trees. The project does not need a variance. The surface parking is located on the northeast side of the building and is covered with combination of standing seam metal roof and Ipe wood trellis with vines. The building overhangs 5 feet over the driveway. The shadow study performed on June 21st at 3 p.m. indicates that most of the portion of the driveway will be shaded due to the building. The shading with the trees and these additional measures cumulatively mitigate the heat island effect associated with the surface parking. Articulated facade. A 12-inch parapet wall has been added along the periphery of the building on the roof. This parapet wall is cladded with a brushed aluminum sheet. The parapet with cladding defines and articulates the top of the building. Brushed aluminum panels has been part of the building material palette of this project. The application of aluminum sheet cladding is similar to 3-form cladding. The revision is aligned with Palo Alto Municipal Code and El Camino Real guidelines. The proposed building has well-articulated facade with storefronts, glass overhangs, balconies, terraces, and operable doors and windows. The third floor walls have been set back 8 feet to reduce the massing of the building and to complement the neighboring 2-story buildings. The building form also expresses the use of the space. On the ground floor, the concrete columns and glass storefronts maintain the rhythm and scale of the neighboring storefronts. The second floor office space has balcony with vertical screen garden, which provides a beautiful view and shading. The third floor walls are recessed 8 feet, creating terraces for residential use and provide privacy for residential spaces. Materials. A detailed material sheet, which includes brief specifications, material pictures, construction details, have been submitted in the package. There is no change in the previous material, but just an addition of aluminum sheet cladding for the parapet wall. There are 2 different types of screens used in this project. The screen used for screening mechanical equipment on the roof is made up of perforated aluminum sheet, which has 1-inch diameter hole placed 4-inch center to center. This will screen the equipment properly. The other screen used is for bicycle parking and is made up of stainless steel with smaller holes and 40% openness. 3 form color sample and pictures are included, which are consistent with the colors in the rendering. With this revision, we have submitted photorealistic rendered elevations that show the material color, texture, and its location in the building precisely. The next couple of slides show rendered elevations. The building has honest expression of concrete structural frame, and the palette is really minimal with concrete, steel, and glass as main structural materials, and preform and aluminum for cladding. Landscape design. The landscape design has been revised after consultation with architect Annie Huang. There is no existing tree on the sidewalk or on the property. We are providing total of 5 London plane trees on the sidewalks and 1 at the end of the driveway. Japanese maple trees have been replaced with 4 Western redbud trees, which are native, drought tolerant, and ornamental. It grows around 15 feet tall, so satisfies the constraint of overhead electrical cables along the alley. A landscape planting strip with 4 Western redbud trees, shrubs, and bamboo planters along the alley act as buffer and screen between the proposed building and the residential apartments. A vehicular parking on grade is partially covered with Ipe wood trellis and flowering creepers, which will provide shade to the parked cars as well as create beautiful views for the residents and the neighbors. Metal planters with African iris plant has been proposed along El Camino Real and Matadero Avenue side. The planters with beautiful iris plant will enhance the pedestrian experience as well as provide a screen and a view to occupants. African iris is a drought tolerant and robust perennial with great aesthetic value and easy care. On the second floor balcony on El Camino side, a vertical screen garden has been proposed. A cable trellis system will be provided, which will guide creepers potted in the planters in the balcony. The creepers and cables will create a beautiful garden screen with interesting view and make urban space more livable. It will also help reducing solar gain, mitigating noise and dust. Most of the proposed landscape elements can be seen in the rear view from the corner of Matadero Avenue and the alley. There is a little change in the program on the second floor. A 1-bedroom unit on the second floor has been converted to 1,240 square foot 2-bedroom unit. 2 car parking spaces have been required for this unit in the mechanical elevator lift system. The project fulfills parking requirements. Guest parking is not required, but a shared parking program can assist with guest parking for residential uses. The surface parking spaces allocated for office use can be shared with the residences after business hours for guest parking. Regarding subterranean parking, a detailed study, a comparison of parking solution, and multiple design options have been submitted to the planning department, including 1-way ramp with stackers, 2-way ramp with stackers, and a 1-way driveway with a jog. Even with 1-way ramp, the maximum permitted slope and 180-degree turning radius for cars could not be accommodated. Despite of proposing full 6,000 square foot basement, we were able to accommodate only 3 car parking spaces in the basement, thus requiring use of 3-tier mechanical vehicular lift system in the basement to maximize the parking to 8 to 9 cars. The study has been provided to show how basement layout, position of stairs, elevators would impact above grade in meeting the code requirements and design guidelines. Basement parking is not feasible due to the size and shape of the property. We are not able to fulfill California Green Building Code requirement, Palo Alto Municipal Code requirement of 2 car parking spaces on grade. And we are able to provide only 11 cars, and this project needs 15 car parking spaces. Basement parking will require entry and exit from the alley, which will increase traffic in the alley as well as impact the neighboring residences. No trees or landscape can be proposed along the alley with the basement layout. With this, I will conclude my presentation and hand over to Joe.
Thank you, Pratima. Should I need to? Good morning, ARB members. First of all, I appreciate the time that you spend. It's really well appreciated. I did 2 terms on the ARB, and I think it's very helpful. Let's see. I've designed a few 100,000 square feet of buildings, commercial buildings on El Camino, as well as major downtown Palo Alto buildings. I've designed shopping centers. So we're I have a wide range of projects we've worked on. But it gives me immense pleasure to present a mixed-use building on this 60-foot micro site. And most of you understand that is the size of a single-family residential site in Palo Alto. The project has, well, as I mentioned, a small site, and we did have remediated soil that is cleaned up now. The site is clean. Let's see. Pardon me?
1 minute warning.
One minute left. Yeah.
What
We have design team ready. We can move to
yeah,
construction.
yes, we have our design team is ready, and we're ready to get receive your approval so we can move this project along. Once again, I just want to say how much I appreciate the time you give on the ARB. We're really excited about the project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Anytime.
Thank you very much, Architect Palomo. Do we have any questions for the applicant from any member of the staff of the ARB?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, David.
Earlier renditions had solar collectors on the roof. Can you tell us, are they still there? Are they still part of the project?
There will be solar and PV panels on the roof.
Thank you.
Both for, we're gonna, and we do that. For example, 102 here, this building here, we have solar panels, but yes, we will have them, David.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Very well, then I'd like to open up the meeting then to comments from any members of the public. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address us?
Currently, there are no raised hands.
Very well, then we'll close our meeting to public comment and begin board deliberations. Before we start, I'd like to have Jody or one member of the staff read the comments sent to us by Ozma Thompson, who's not with us today. Ozma's not voting on the project, but I'd like for her comments to be read into the record so everybody hears what she had to say. Jody, could you do that, please? Jody or any member of staff?
Sorry, I had to leave for a second. What's the question?
I'd like to read Ozma's brief comments into the record at this point.
Yes, 1 second
This
here.
is
I'll
an
bring
email
those up.
Ozma sent to Jody Gerhardt this morning.
Yes, so she said on this particular project, she said, in general, the design is lacking a granular detail and warmth. The effort to articulate the top of the building by utilizing a change in material on the top parapet is ineffective at defining the top and appears slightly out of place. A change in plane would certainly bring more definition to it, but could potentially be out of place as well with the language of the rest of the building. The problem remains that the top story appears to be one big wall element without much relief and could benefit from a material or textural change for the whole top story. Since just altering the tiny silver band of the parapet doesn't do much for the scale of the building as a whole. In a similar vein, the design would benefit with a change in material for one of the stories instead of having the same 3M material on every floor to bring up the monotony of the appearance of the mass. For this reason, she finds that she could not make finding number 2 and would not recommend approval.
Okay, thank you for reading that, Jody. David, would you like to go next on this project?
I'd like to go last if you don't mind.
Fair enough. Grace, how about you then? Are you willing to put your opinion on the line right now?
I am willing. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
And I just want to start with a big thank you to planning staff and to Sheldon for a very complete staff report as well as your presentation. I appreciate in particular walking us through some of the previous studies and how to problem solve, and just it really shows how the applicant has really gone above and beyond over a period of time to find the right solution and to work with the city as well, the staff as well as our board. Overall, I have to say that I'm very much in agreement with planning staff to recommend this project for approval. I believe that is consistent with the findings. And I'll say further that, you know, this is going to be the first project to be approved under the Housing Incentive Program, a very welcome addition to the El Camino corridor. Not an easy site. However, how much better can we do, right, than the 30-year-old vacant and then the Quonset hut that was there before? It's consistent with the South El Camino guidelines as well as the vision for the Barron Ventura area. And I just want to reiterate, we all know this is a mixed-use building that's happening with housing and retail. And so to walk through some of the responsiveness from the applicant, I do appreciate the shading exhibits and just understanding my colleagues' comments regarding trees, perhaps a change in the tree and then in one of the trees, and also making sure about that 50% requirement. I see that it meets that. I also think that, you know, in terms of how the site diagram is working, I mean, just given the site and the access issues, that this makes a lot of sense in many ways. I do think that it's buffered along the alley, and that the Matadero street facade, and as well as the El Camino street facade and access and parking works very efficiently and in a way that is really thinks about the context and how to also protect the users in terms of safety. We talked a little bit, and it wasn't on my side, but I believe other colleagues had mentioned the whole base middle top issue or challenge. I never really saw that as a challenge, but I just want to talk a little bit about articulation of base middle top. And I respectfully just have a different perspective than my colleague, Vice Member Thompson. I think if we look at this building from all sides, to me, what's terrific is there's this wonderful concrete frame, and that is the main skeleton and something that we see overall. Now that skeleton really breaks down with transparency, with solids and voids, and a rich variety of materials. And so I just wanted to walk through kind of my reading of base, middle, top, and thank you staff for in your staff report, kind of walking through an applicant. And Pratma and Joe, thank you so much for your responses. I feel very strongly that the top is now articulated with this parapet. It goes all the way around. But I just want to go back to that concrete frame because for me, that is what unifies the whole building, both at the ground and middle and top. And we see that articulation is different at each level on how that frame is pierced, where things are sitting in plane. So I think we all agree on the base, we have this wonderful, these planters and the higher ceiling height. You know, everything is working to really read as a strong base. At the middle, the concrete frame is there. However, we have the steel railing and the vertical cables with the landscape element. And it's a clear kind of part of the concrete frame, but it is differentiated from the base. And at the top, the concrete frame disappears. I don't see the long, you know, too much of one material because it's also recessed for that balcony with an awning. You really only see the three form. I do not feel like it's used in an excessive way because we now have the parapet, the cap on top, as well as this translucent material as the balcony, and it's recessed. And then the shadow of the awnings. For me, there's a very strong base, middle, and top, and I just wanted to walk through that. The other piece that I wanted to mention is I applaud the colors and textures and the variety that is shown in the palette. For me, the rock wall provides a texture. The landscape that is in planters along both street sides, El Camino and along Matadero, provides texture and landscape that works well with the building materials and the overall elevations. So I think in summary, I don't think we should delay. I think it's time to approve. The applicant has been very responsive to our comments, and I also just want to send a thank you, particularly the handout that was part of the package on materials is very thorough, and I appreciate that. I also think that, and thank you for the paper sets this time. I feel like this set, in terms of the elevations and sections and plans and all of it, could be a model example for other applicants who are proposing to the ARB. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it on. Thanks.
Peter, I think you were on mute.
I said, thank you, Grace, for your comments and asked Alex to speak next.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you, Joe and Pratma. I think that the project looks really good, and I can recommend, I think I can recommend approval today. I do think that there's some things that are missing. I think you've been showing things in your presentation, but they're not in the drawing set. So here's what I've got on my list that I think need to come back to the board in some way, perhaps subcommittee. One is the rear trellis and carport in the back. I don't see any details of that. Also, I don't see the roofing material. I think you've shown some in your presentation today. I think the drawings are calling out a corrugated metal. I think what's shown in the presentation today is fine. I would have some reservations about corrugated metal just because it's fairly reflective when it's new. The second item is the metal planters. I don't see any spec sheets and sizes for those. So I think it seems to me you've got quite a number of them, like at the street and the alley and the second floor. So I think we do need to see that. Also, you're showing on the second floor, you're showing the cable system, connecting from the ceiling soffit down through to the bottom of the planters. I think that that's like a critical detail that the board should review to make sure that it's actually workable. Also, I think there are some sort of metal grates or louvers above the parking lifts, the parking lift doors, and I don't really see those called out anywhere. So I think that that needs to come back for review. I don't have any conceptual issues, I think, with what's being shown. I think the idea, though, is to try to screen anything that's, I think we do want to try to screen the cars that will be in the parking lifts, especially from the neighbors. So I think we should have some consideration for that. And with regard to the base metal top, I think I understand Ozma's point of view. I guess in my mind, the awnings that you have above the third floor doors and windows, to me, I would consider that part of the cornice element, like it's a projecting element. And so I think that for me, that satisfies creating some sort of cap on the building. And I think with regard to the base metal top, I think it's really critical that we do that for large buildings, but this is not really one of them. I think we have to, I think the board needs to still pursue the base metal top on a really large project. It's really a critical concept to breaking down the scale of buildings, but I'm finding that for this one, it's not really, not quite such a large issue. So anyway, that's where I am. I'm generally I can recommend approval with items coming back somehow to the board.
Thank you very much, Alex. Out of respect to David's request to be the last comment, I'll offer my suggestions now. In general, I can recommend approval of this building. I think it's a handsome building and will do its job well. I'd like to offer one minor concern that is something that's not really directly our purview, but I noticed that all the residential units have no closets. And I'm hard pressed to believe that it will end up being built that way. And I'm not sure if what will end up happening is larger units getting created, perhaps going back to 1-bedroom units with proper closets and things. But I guess I'd like to leave it to staff's discretion, but we specifically pointed out that we didn't want to have the parking reduced by having the bedroom count being made larger. And I think that the layouts still need a little more work. So I'm in favor of letting the project go forward, in spite of the fact that I think there'll be some revisions on the bedroom layouts. But I'm just pointing that out, that I don't know if other board members are concerned about that, but I think those.
Chair Balte?
Yes.
Is it possible to ask the applicant where they think those closets may go? Because I think if they're interior, that would be fine for staff to handle. But we wouldn't want them maybe changing the exterior windows.
Exactly. Let's come back to that though, see if the rest of the board has any concern about it even, because I don't want to drag this out if it's just my thing. The closets themselves are not our concern. And I think I'm bringing it up just because Alex had mentioned, I think appropriately, that the proper unit size would require an extra parking place, which they seem to have accommodated. My other thought is to really address the issue of base middle top. That's something we've all been discussing and thinking about. And so at a high level, I think this building exemplifies why it's important in our objective design standards that we have some way to evaluate buildings without such a rigid criteria like a base, a middle, and a top. This is, I believe, a building that fits in well with its environment and the streetscape on El Camino, and is clearly well articulated and beautifully designed. But I don't believe it has a base, middle, and a top of the formal traditional sense. I don't think the 1-foot parapet screen on the top really these can be called a parapet or a top. It doesn't, as Ozma pointed out, it would need a lot more planar definition to really make it do that. However, the real purpose behind the base, middle, and top is to ensure that the buildings have sufficient articulation and really to help them relate to other buildings on the street and in the plane. And I think this building, by setting the concrete form, the frame, sort of relating to the rest of the buildings along the street, and it just fits right in with my gut feeling of Palo Alto. It's sort of, you can see Joe Bellomo's been around a long time and he gets what El Camino looks like, and the building fits. It just goes right in there with the way the frame is done. And I think that does the purpose of the parapet. And really it's the second floor overhang with the glass wall, I think, is the top in that formal sense. And the upper piece is recessed back. And clearly the building is well articulated with the openings in the frame and the ins and outs and the way the doors are put at the corner. So I can support this building as meeting the intent of the South El Camino Real design guidelines. And I can support recommending approval. I do support Alex's request for a subcommittee to review a few of those items. With that, David, why don't you speak?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sheldon, that's a very nice initial presentation. And
Very nice.
congratulations to the client's method of describing it this time, very succinct and to the point on every item that has been raised, and including your latest presentation, which is also complete. I really, I have to take a different tack because Grace stole every thunder from this descriptive part of the project here.
Have your chance, David.
I don't want to repeat everything that she said. So my take on the building has, from the beginning, has been very, very positive to the extremely strong idea of this frame that sets the tone of the building, and all other things are kind of subservient to it, except for the volume, kind of that tan volume that projects itself from the base all the way through to the top. And all of the detail on the surface, I think, has improved somewhat, but was there, at least in concept, from the very beginning. And I think I could say that I appreciate Ozma's push on the parapet. And I think they must have studied it a bit, because it, you know, had to be not really projecting element or an extremely visible piece. Otherwise, it would likely conflict with the stronger aspect of the building framework. So in the end, it was a kind of a techie kind of a piece of metal on the top that simply changed the proportion, and that has improved the top of the building. So I appreciate it. My take is that there's some other ways in which we should look at buildings, not just static views from the street scene from across the street, because after all, if you're in the middle of the street, you're never even going to see the top of this building. Or if you're in a car traveling along El Camino from one or the other side, you're not going to see it at all from the perspectives that we look at to determine whether a building is aesthetically appropriate or not. And I think we could look at this building from the perspective of the car, or what you would see when you drove on this particular street, which is filled with fast-moving traffic and then sort of quiet zones. It's a strange kind of feeling that you get when you're on El Camino. But this is a very powerful frame of concrete, and it is expressive on the street. And you'll see it from several blocks away, because there isn't much coming from the south. There isn't very much there to interrupt you. The view is open with the gas station. So this is quite a corner piece. And I think it's going to make an impression even to a car, because it's so simple and so direct. It has that beauty of sort of attracting your eye to it, with the brightness of the frame and the openness and the corner. And I want to speak to the corner because, you know, the corner makes an urban statement that I think is just terrific here. And it's the way in which I would like to see corners made much more, and especially El Camino corner, where the sidewalks are so bloody narrow that you really need relief. And we don't talk about a building that way, but that's a terrific corner now, recessed that way so that your eye can flow around it and you can actually walk that turn around the corner. And it gives us the 12-foot sidewalk that we really desperately need on El Camino. And hopefully we could extend it on many other areas of El Camino. So just reflecting a bit, Grace seemed to catch most of the detail of it, and Alex, all of that great detail that you added to it, which I think all of which are important aspects too. So putting those two together, I think that's such a complete picture. So my emphasis really on these kind of urban issues as to what is a building in the urban structure here? What does it do? Well, what it does is in a neighborhood that's desperate for improvement, it is the improvement. And I think that you'll see other people investing in this part of El Camino. And we could see a future that if it has buildings like this at the corner and then the buildings adjacent to it are kind of obsequious to it or respectful of it, that's probably a better word. This almost could be a prototype for the city. Not that I hope that it will be that way in all cases, but I really think this will, you know, be an excellent developer of the rest of this area of the city, which is really in need of a lot of work. I think that agree with Grace that the detail that has been added to this building is improving it, but it was there. That the wood on the balcony and the planters and the yes, I did want to mention one other aspect that as it faces a very busy street and a very noisy street at moments, the ground floor, which is somewhat protected but yet visible, is an enclosed area. But the second floor is set back, which in terms of the sound issues of the street, I think is a very appropriate thing to do. That area needs to be quieter. You may still go out on the balcony. You don't look at the traffic when you're in there as an office. And then the same thing is true in the top floor. Those two balconies set the function of the building back. And that's a very important aspect to the planning of this building. So it all kind of works together. The frame of the building and the setback of the function of the building are two things that work together. And the top floor, of course, needs to be that because it's a residence. Now, as to the corner, and then you turn the corner and you see the entry 3 stories high in that frame. So it doesn't lose emphasis on the entry to the building as well, which I think is an excellent way in which to turn a corner and to indicate a change in function the way it does. So I think that one other aspect to this is that, you know, you see a building both at day and night. And now that the days are shorter, you have to imagine this building. And I think if I were to give the architect some advice, they should have shown it with the lights on and the sky dark, because that's a totally different view of a building. And so the upper floor will sort of lose the setback, which we've been talking about as base, middle, top. The top of the building all of a sudden will disappear. And the frame of the building will be kind of that 2-story turning to 3-story around the corner. Keep looking at the photograph of it because it's right here in front of us, and you know, we can see the strength of it. And you imagine that whole kind of glassy area down below with lights on in it through the frame. It's a very dramatic corner, and we shouldn't forget that we need to look at buildings both from daylight and nighttime. We have done that on other projects, and it's important to do. It should have been done here, and we should have been asked to see it at night, because it's a selling point for that building to see what it will be like with a frame lit that way. So the transparency of the kind of glassy areas and the setback in the entry areas above will all emphasize the way the frame is used here. So I just want to make one slight comment to Peter about the closets, because I noticed that in the first time I looked at the plan, I said, where the hell are the closets? And so I talked to the architects about it when I visited there, and they suggested IKEA. There are armoires, and I looked in at the area where I thought there should be closets inside. And it is true that a lot of people go out and buy their own and make their own closets. After all, if you had more space, you'd call in California Closets. But in this case, IKEA is a good bet for buying ready-made closets that will fit into the corner that's adjacent to the bathroom there in the apartment. So I don't think it's a critical issue. Just to end sort of with my own opinion, because I really, it sort of agrees with Grace and Alex about how this building should be seen as a base, middle, top, because I'm kind of hoping that we will get to redefine what that really means somehow, if it needs to be redefined. In this case, I don't think you need to really discuss it as a base, middle, top, because the strength of the frame of the building is enough to carry the intent here. And it's more of a question of the contrast between the base, middle, the contrast between the frame and the body of the building. So if we could readjust our vocabulary to talk about base, middle, top, to be more reflective of this kind of dimensional sculptural treatment of a building, I think we'd be doing ourselves a great service, not to be too hung up on that image. And I'll tell you that I speak about this as a person who worked in New York on buildings where I was trying to make my building look like it fits into a block. And the block was a 20th century, 19th century buildings with base, middles, and tops, and very exposed cornices and very expressed cornices. And that is indeed where you really do need to do something that doesn't look outlandish in relation to the street facades. When there's consistent blocks of base, middle, and top, then I agree, you must have a base, middle, top, or recognize it at the very least. And in that case, I would do it. In fact, to build a cornice like they did in the past, except out of fiberglass, working out all of the details so you could extend it out over the front of a building and have it secure. And window surrounds and everything else that's a part of that era of construction. But let's us think about Palo Alto as kind of moving on. And this building is a good representation of just that. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, David. Okay, I hear 4 voices of support for this project. I'd like to check though that Alex has suggested a few items come back to a subcommittee, which I support. Grace, do you support that as well, or do you think it should not have those items for subcommittee?
I'm open to the subcommittee approach. I'm also open to coming back to planning staff to review. But it sounds like in this group, there's kind of moving towards the subcommittee approach.
David, what's your opinion about the items Alex suggested?
I've been pretty happy with the degree of detail on the project as it is. If there's one or two that Alex feels strongly about, certainly I have no problem with it coming back to committee.
Okay, great. And then let's be clear about the point I brought up about the closets and the layout. And my concern is not whether or not they even have closets or where they come from, but rather if they come back with a change on the floor plan, what should staff do? At what point do they come back to us or to a subcommittee or something? And I think it's incumbent upon us just to give them clear guidance, especially since my guess is that they're going to make a change on that sooner or later. So we could bring up the plans and ask the applicant for some opinion. But if we were to say, look, any change that affects the positioning of windows, then we want to see it. And we don't want to see the parking count reduced, even if they cut back a bedroom. Is that a fair statement to leave that as the position of the board instead? Grace, what do you think?
Well, I think it's not really within our purview. However, planning staff would definitely come back to us in any case, right? If elevations are changed.
Well, we're just trying to make it easier for them so that the guidelines are set. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Sure.
Or who else?
I could go along with the statement that if there's any change in elevation, should be brought to our attention somehow. If that's a motion you would like to make.
Well, and the parking count, because the parking count increased with the addition of the bedroom. And I'd be loath to see the parking count get reduced. Alex, what's your take on this?
So yeah, thank you for the comment on the closets. I did notice that, and I decided not to mention it. I think that I think we should just flag it.
Okay.
I think the closet is an actual issue because once you go to the county, if it doesn't have a closet, then it's considered a study. It's not considered a bedroom. So yeah, I think we should I think we could just put in a condition of approval that any changes to the exterior require it to come back to the board somehow.
Okay. Then I don't think we should discuss it any further. Alex, can you perhaps make a motion? We'll see if we can carry with your items that you're concerned about.
Okay, well, I will make a motion that we recommend approval of the project to the planning director with the following 4 items to return to subcommittee. One is to provide details and material specs of the carport and trellis. And I think the trellis is called out as EPE in the drawings, in the current drawings, and that's fine. 2, provide a spec sheet for the planters on the ground floor, second floor, and along the alley. And provide a detail of the wire detail on the second floor. And the wires for the vines, right?
Okay.
Third one is to provide the material and installation detail of the screening material above the parking lifts. So that's at the mezzanine level. Okay, three items. The first one on the carport, it was trellis detail. It was the trellis, just the details of it, and then also the metal roof. So that makes it 4 items.
Okay. I can support that, and we'll second that motion. We can have a vote on it now, or Grace, would you like to try to make a friendly or contrary amendment to reduce it take it out of subcommittee?
I'm happy to support it.
Okay, well then let's, with that, why don't we just have a vote? Can we do a roll call vote, please, Vin or Veronica?
Yes. Chair Bolte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes?
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
We need to bring this.
And Vice Chair Thompson is absent, so the motion passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Thompson absent.
Very good. Thank you very much. Congratulations to our applicant. Before we move on, I'd like to just appoint the subcommittee to be Alex Liu and David Hirsch. So the staff again knows how we'll treat that into the future. Very good then. Let's move on to our next item, or does anybody need a break for 5 minutes? No?
Yes.
Yes?
No- Nobody else?
Okay.
I
Okay.
could last if you had to, but.
I can take a break.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, please. It's 9:47. Let's resume at 9:52. Thank you. Okay, are we all back here? Grace, you're with us?
I'm with you.
Alex, are you with me? David? Okay, we're back in session. Next item is action item number 3, a public hearing, quasi-judicial for 3241 Park Boulevard. Recommendation on a major architecture review to allow for the demolition of a portion of the existing 4,500 square foot building, in addition, resulting in a proposed floor area of 7,861 square feet. Can we have a disclosures, please? Does anybody have any disclosures to make?
Just simply that I visited the site.
Grace visited.
Materials board too, right? There was a materials board. I think I saw that as well.
Okay, Alex?
Yeah, I visited the site and the materials board.
Thank you. David, any disclosures? Dave Hirsch, any disclosures to this project?
I was on mute. No, yes, I was on the site, at the site, in the materials board.
Okay, I'll disclose the same. I was out to the site, looked at it from several angles, and visited the materials board at City Hall. Okay, can we have a staff report, please?
Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Good morning, board members. My name is Garrett. I am the project planner for this application. The site is 3241 Park Boulevard, which is a existing building that is being remodeled, partially torn down and remodeled, which is adjacent to the Fry's electronics site within the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, the future North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan area. So in general, what the project is proposing to do is it is going to be a 2-story R&D and office building, which will total about 7,861 square feet. They're proposing to have 31 spaces, which will be at least 9 on the at grade, and then they'll have a parking lift within the back end of the site, which will include 21 spaces. So they'll have 2 parking lifts that'll have a total of 21 spaces, basically bringing the site into compliance with our code requirements. In addition to that, they'll be providing 5 bicycle spaces on the site with 4 long-term spaces and 1 short-term space. The proposed landscaping that they have will provide for at least a 55% canopy over the parking area, which is exceeding our 50% requirement over the next 15 years. The site, given that it was previously used as a auto service, had some chemicals that had intruded into the ground as a result. And so there's a soil investigation that was included in your packet that demonstrated that a soil vapor mitigation system would be required, which the applicant we've been in communication, staff has been in communication with the Department of Toxic Substances Control and the Regional Water Quality Control Board to have them start that process and get the necessary documents prepared for those departments once this project is approved and gone through to go through their system. The existing building has a concrete block and wood frame structural system, which again, they are tearing down a portion of that building, which roughly 2,000 square feet, and retaining that other existing portion, and then adding square footage onto the remaining areas. As a result of the work that they are doing, this project would be able to fall underneath a class 3 and 32 exemption for new small structures and infill development, as it's below the thresholds that the state has, that CEQA has identified as being less than significant of an impact. In general, what you're seeing here is a site plan of the facility. So along this bottom side, which you see my mouse moving to, is Park Boulevard, which is the frontage of the site. Along this left-hand side and up above on the top left and top of the screen is where the Matadero Creek is, which is what which is where Santa Clara Valley Water District holds, their ability to review projects within those areas. We have routed this project to Santa Clara Valley Water District, and you'll note in the conditions of approval letter that they did provide conditions of approval for additional review of this parking lift structure, which is back along here. Staff and the applicant has had meetings with the Santa Clara Valley Water District to review this preliminarily and determine whether or not it would be feasible. And that's where you see the conditions of approval identifying that the preliminarily they have looked at it and they said that it seems like it will be okay, but they'll need to do a more formal review with their geotechnical and structural engineer once they have that permit. So additionally, you'll be able to see they have a trash enclosure located in this backhand corner, which is pushed further away from the street, so it reduces the presence of that material, of that facility. Additionally, in this bottom left-hand corner where you see my mouse moving, they do have a transformer placed within this area, but as you'll see on the elevation drawings, they do have it appropriately screened with a fencing, which has been reviewed by utilities, and they have indicated that this is an appropriate solution. On the site plan, again, you'll be able to see the 9 parking spaces they have along the street or along the ground level, and then additionally the remaining 21 spaces which you see in these 2 parking lifts along the side. Along this front area that you see my mouse moving around here is just a gathering space for the tenants of the building, which is shrouded effectively by these planter wall that you have here in this kind of background image. You see this smaller planter below, but further beyond it is this planter wall, which you can see will be able to screen this from view, but provide also a space for air flow to move through and not become kind of a stodgy area. On this right-hand side in the elevation that you see here is where that transformer I mentioned before is going to be located, which you can see is screened by this fencing. On the left-hand side is where they're going to put in their fire spout and everything else, which they are proposing to have a hedge to shield that from view, which are additional things that we typically want to see, so that way we don't have a brand new beautiful building and then a lot of utility equipment that kind of makes it or detracts from that aesthetic appeal. The elevation that you see here is a south-facing elevation, which is basically a cut through to face south on the property, which you can see on the right-hand side over here is where that communal space is for the tenants. This along the back side is that parking lift, which it's at an angle. So while it may seem at this point it's further away, if you come 3-dimensionally towards it or have that structure moving towards you closer, actually would get a little closer to this retaining wall that you see along this left-hand side. You also see here that they have a proposed second floor kind of amenity area. This doesn't qualify for any sort of amenity space as per our definitions, which would limit or reduce floor area or parking regulations that we would have. But it is mostly just for the tenants' ability to enjoy this space as well. So some key considerations for the project is that there are currently 3 existing street trees on the site, which they're proposing to remove and then replace, with 20 trees in total on the site. So they would be exceeding the urban forestry requirements to do tree replacement for those trees, while also placing in a majority of native species on the site, which you'll be able to see on the landscape plans and the documents that were submitted to you in the staff report. In general, the project is well composed and designed. There was a portion along the southern wall that kind of faces towards the substation that staff wanted to have the ARB weigh in and say whether or not they felt that that area needed any sort of additional treatment, or if they felt that the design that was proposed is sufficient. Now, the reason for them having kind of a 2-story wall is fairly understandable. They have an adjacent substation, which is not necessarily the most appealing thing to look at. So the applicant has indicated that their intention for that is so that they can screen that facility from the tenant's view. So as you all had mentioned, this is an example of the material boards. They are proposing to use a smooth child integral cement plaster along the wall, along the majority of the building, while also utilizing a painted metal to help break up the massing of the building, and also using these clear glass along the site to kind of give this openness to it. Lastly, staff is recommending to the ARB to recommend approval of the project and provide any direction that they feel is necessary. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Any questions from any members of the architecture board for the staff? Nothing? Gary, could you clarify for me, please? You measured the shading area in the parking area. Does that include strictly areas shaded by tree plantings, or does it include a vine on a trellis structure as well?
Our understanding is that it's strictly for the tree planting and not the vine, that vine canopy is supplemental, but we can have the applicant clarify that.
Thank you, Garrett. Any other questions? Okay, then do we have the applicant with us? I see Ken Hayes here. Is it Ken or his son who's going to make this presentation today?
Jeff Galbraith with my office, my partner, will be making the presentation. Thanks, Peter. Good to see everybody.
Yes, well, I was just remembering back, Mason was a student of my wife's, you know.
Yeah, right.
If I had to disclose that or not, but.
Well, Mason had a lot to do with the design of this building, so.
Well, she says Mason is a good boy, so whatever that means. But I certainly feel like I should be careful. So in any case, Jeff and Ken, you have 10 minutes to present your project to us. So please go ahead at your convenience.
Okay, are you able to see my screen?
We are.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning, members of the board. I'm Jeff Galbraith. I'm the surrogate son of Ken Hayes, and I'm excited to present this project to you this morning. So our site is located at 3241 Park Boulevard. It's in the sort of the south end of the North Ventura neighborhood, and it's directly across the street from the old Fry's parking lot. It's a unique parcel, as was mentioned, to the south, which would be to the right on your screen. There's an existing electric utility substation, and wrapping around the north and east sides of the lot is the Matadero Creek, which in this area basically consists of two concrete vertical retaining walls and a concrete basin at the bottom. Across the creek to the east is the Caltrain and Alma Street corridor, and across to the north, there's a single-story structure that's currently occupied by Vance Brown Builders. In terms of zoning, the site is zone GM, as are the adjacent parcels to the north along Park Boulevard. The Fry's site across the street is RM30, and kind of kitty corner to the site on the corner of Park and Lambert, there's a CS zone parcel, as well as the parcels on the north side of Lambert. And transitioning really from Lambert south begins the R1 kind of South Ventura residential area. So we're a bit of a transition point. The existing structure is 4,500 square feet, thereabouts. It's about the rear 2/3 of the footprint is high bay space, single story, and the front third is 2-story, where there's office space that supports the use, and the historical use is automotive sales and repair. So in 2018, we brought before the board the design that you see before you, and we got a lot of good constructive criticism. I've highlighted 5 of the most salient points from that review on the screen here. The first was that it felt disconnected from the urban context. The second was that the scale and style felt too institutional for the neighborhood. 3, that there was no front yard landscape setback. 4, that the fence along the Matadero Creek was too tall. And 5, that the curb cut locations were not ideal. So we took the feedback to heart and completely reimagined the building. And at the heart of our proposed concept is the idea of a courtyard. You know, a lot of the comments that we just ran through had to do with how the building related to its context in the neighborhood. And we feel like putting a courtyard at the center of the concept really solves that. It roots the building and the site, it connects the exterior to the interior spaces, it engages the street, and it establishes, in general, just a very open and inviting character to the project. So here you see a elevation perspective from Park Boulevard looking back towards the building. Very different feel, very engaging and open here to the street with a lot of landscape woven into it. So jumping to the site plan, just to talk about how things are laid out on site. The square you see in the center of the site is the remains of the existing structure. We're basically filling in the overhead roll-up door openings with new glazing, reskinning the building in new finish, and then we're demolishing the front third and replacing that with the outdoor courtyard that becomes really the center point that things radiate around. We're proposing to construct a new 2-story bar off to the south, up against the substation lot line. And the gap between the two becomes a glassy entrance point into the building. We're also proposing a freestanding structure in the back to house parking lifts. So again, here, the demolished portion of the existing structure replaced with a courtyard that really connects the use back to the urban environment. A little bit more granular look at the ground floor. The purple area off to the right is where the services are located, electrical, stairs, bathrooms, and so forth. Blue is occupied space. In addition to the main courtyard, we also have sort of a counterpoint secondary outdoor space, which is more of a contemplative, inwardly focused garden we call the refuge. Okay, the first, back to the comments, the first one was the feeling of being disconnected, which had a lot to do with the tuck under parking scheme. In the previous version, we were maximizing FAR, lifting it up above the parking, and avoiding parking going underground for various reasons. And that really resulted in that feeling of disconnection. You can see in the new concept, very different feel, right, to the building. Here's a section through showing again the connection of the building through that forecourt and the roof deck on top. And one of the devices we're using to create a little bit of a sense of separation, but still engagement, is hanging vines with, or hanging cables rather, with vines trained up on them. So that would be located between the courtyard and the sidewalk. And here you see in the magenta lines show paths of travel. You can see how the forecourt really becomes a center point that you're invited to walk along if you want to take the sidewalk and get filtered views through the hanging vines, or you're also invited to walk through it. And as such, the forecourt becomes a key piece of your entry procession into the project. Here's a few views of what that might look like. Here you've parked your car and you're looking back towards the building. Here you've entered the forecourt, and here you've turned the corner and are facing towards the main entrance. So the second comment we received was about scale and style feeling a little too institutional. We feel like the current proposal does a much better job of transitioning between the urban and suburban contexts. It does that through extensive landscaping, the use of trellis and canopy structures, stepped massing, and just overall smaller scale of the project. We've reduced the project floor area by about 25% from the previous version. The third comment was that there was no front yard landscape setback, and we were encouraged to study other projects along Park Boulevard. You see 4 of those here, and you notice that all 4 of them have a strip of landscaping between the sidewalk and the building. And so, whereas the previous proposal did not, with the exception of a sunken garden in one location, as we've discussed, and as you can see on the right, the current proposal has a lot more landscaping built into that frontage. And in the site plan, you can see as well, whereas the previous project was right up against the sidewalk, we're now set back 10 to 30 feet, depending on where you are on the site. The fourth comment was that we have this tall wall shielding view of the Matadero Creek. And that's been eliminated. We're now just proposing to keep the existing fence and instead buffering that edge with trees that does a nicer job of improving views from both sides. And the last comment was regarding the curb cuts. Previously, we had left the 2 existing curb cuts in place, and in the current proposal, we're consolidating those into one, which has less impact on the pedestrian experience. Quick look at the second floor, very simple format. Again, the purple service bar on the right, blue occupied space with floor to ceiling glass around the west, north, and east sides, which gives you access onto the second floor outdoor space. Section through there, you'll notice here a dashed line off to the right. That's indicative of motorized sunshades. that can be deployed or retracted around those glassy facades. Here's a view of what that terrace might look like. Some precedent images that inspired us as we developed this concept. And I will leave you with a few perspectives of the project. Again, here looking from Park Boulevard with the shades at the second floor deployed, and here retracted. A view from the south, and a final view from the west, looking back towards the building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Do we have any questions for the applicant from any members of the board?
Peter, if I may, I mean, it's up to you if you think appropriate, but I thought it would be nice to hear from the applicant regarding what the staff had directed our attention to, the two-story flat wall. Would it be okay to just hear their thoughts?
Please, go ahead, but maybe formulate your question carefully. This is a question for staff or the applicant?
No, for the applicant.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and ask them?
Thanks for your presentation. Could you please just speak about your thinking and design of the two-story flat wall? I believe that's the south, facing the city substation.
Certainly. So currently along that edge, if we go back to maybe this view shows a little bit, there's an existing fence along that side that's probably, let's say about 10 or 12 feet tall or so. And within the substation, there's also a lot of vertical elements that carry wires. So there's not a lot of visibility on that wall. And we've talked about different options for how to break down the scale of it a little bit, whether it's a combination of joints in the plaster, kicked around the idea of is it an appropriate place for public art. So I think we're open to options to some extent, but also recognizing that it's not going to be a very visible element.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that question, Grace. Any other questions? Then I would like to ask the applicant to address for me, please, the question of the existing building that you're proposing to retain. How much of that building will actually be retained? Do you have any engineering sense of what's actually usable?
So we have talked to a structural engineer and had some sort of initial plans formulated. Basically, the existing structure is built of concrete masonry units. And in that rear 2/3 of the floor plate, you've got columns between the overhead doors, and then you have a band of CMU up over the top of the doors that heads up, terminates at the parapet. So we intend to keep all that CMU in place. The roof structure itself will need to be either reinforced or replaced in order to support the roof garden up above. And in order to cut off the front of it, there'll be some additional steel to strengthen that front facade laterally. But our intent is to keep the CMU in that area.
Okay, thank you. I asked that question because on 2 previous Hayes Group projects, we've ended up seeing, at least one of them, the one on the corner of Lytton and Waverly, the building came down completely to a slab and then was completely rebuilt, and yet we were told it would be remaining. And then on the Mills Floors project, as we all know, that's been quite an issue. But again, at that point, we were hearing exactly the same thing about intention to preserve. And if it wouldn't be better to get some real engineering input as to whether that can really handle the new seismic loads and the new loads of that roof deck above, or if it will end up just being torn down to a slab again and starting over, and if that affects things. But that's the second half of my question, I guess, to staff, is there any zoning or entitlement benefit to the applicant for keeping that existing building? I just don't want to see us get in a position where the whole city is with the Mills project, where it's incredibly controversial now that the building can't be saved, and yet what do we do? Jody or Garrett, can you address that, please?
Yeah, so there is no benefit that's being provided to or afforded to the applicant for retaining the existing building. Typically, we, like you are usually seeing, is kind of a tear down of everything and scraping the site and rebuilding it. But that's not a requirement for people to follow, at least as of yet. So overall, their proposal is going to be consistent and meet the minimum requirements that we have for parking, for floor area, for canopy, for landscaping, kind of anything in the code that we would be applying for a new building they are going to be consistent and compliant with those requirements. So there's nothing like additional floor area or, you know, relaxation of any sort of regulation that we have that is afforded to them by retaining the building.
And does that apply, Garrett, as well to environmental impact reports or studies?
Yeah, it would similarly apply. We looked at basically the whole site with our exemption document as if, you know, there's going to be effectively some kind of new building, whether it's, you know, part of it existing and the other to be torn down. There's still going to be a lot of work done on it. So it doesn't kind of cut off, you know, the threshold of what we are looking at because someone's keeping some of the building.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering the question. With that then, let's see, do we have any members of the public who would like to address us on any item here or on this item? Do we have any speakers, Veronica?
No, currently no raised hands.
No raised hands. Okay, so then we'll move on from that and begin our own deliberations on this. As earlier, Jody, could you or someone please read the comments Ozma Thompson emailed in? Again, Ozma is not voting today, but I'd like her comments to be read into the record for everyone to hear.
Yes, so Board Member Thompson's comments on this particular project were that aesthetically, the project's very handsome, providing small scale details in the soffit and trellis locations, except for the wall facing the substation. There could be more done here to break up this long blank facade. The applicant should also show this in context when we see this again. The protruding shading element is unusual, and its relationship with the overhang is also unusual, but aesthetically and proportionately, it seems to work. With the rest of the building, while the rest of the building looks great, that blank wall is significant enough that I would not recommend leaving it to subcommittee. And at this moment, it is the only thing that would keep Board Member Thompson from recommending approval.
Thank you for that, for reading that, Jody. Then Alex, would you like to start us off today, please?
Sure. And I do want to, I do have one additional disclosure, is that I have researched this site historically as part of the North Ventura area study that I've been working on. And that historically there's been some very unusual things on this property, like including some sort of bridge that connected both sides of the creek to each other. But it was very difficult to learn more about that site, about the site, and also that the creek alignment has shifted over time, and there has been flooding here in this area before the most recent flood improvements were made. Okay, so I think the design is very handsome. I have a hard time imagining this beautiful building next to the substation. I've been having a hard time sort of reconciling that. And I've been having a hard time sort of reconciling the project with the context of the other buildings on Park Boulevard. But we don't have specific context-based findings for the GM district, so I don't really have any objections to what's being proposed today. The items on my list, one which I mentioned before, which is I'm not crazy about the placement of the street trees, just because it's different than the rest of the block. I will accept them, and I think this mostly because we've had lots of comments about from neighbors who want wider sidewalks on Park, and so I think that this does that. So I can support that. I think also if I look at the comp plan goals for the creek. I think this project does much better with keeping the area open and planted. It seems to me to be much better than the previous scheme, so I can support that part of the project. On findings, I wasn't completely comfortable with some of the wording that the staff has put in there. So, like one on package page 70 for our finding number 5 with regard to landscape. You know, the draft language says, as the site is in the developed portion of the city, it's not considered prime habitat. But I think from my understanding and listening to lots of people in the North Ventura CAP process, they actually consider the creek prime habitat. And it is really actually a naturalized creek just on the other side of El Camino. You know, this side is a concrete channel. But the city has plans, some preliminary studies for naturalizing this portion of the creek, you know, up to Park Boulevard. So I don't want to say that this is somehow it's not prime habitat. The neighbors have testified that there are, or at least there used to be, frogs in the area trying to get down to the creek. There are some really beautiful old oak trees on the Friars property site. So, yeah, so I prefer to strike that. And I would add there that the proposed planting plan does have the west redbuds and the western sycamores proposed along the creek, which are both native plants, and they're both wildlife friendly. So I think that that should be added into the finding. And then I think my last comment is if I could go back to the street trees, I think I would like that maybe to go back to urban forestry for a comment. So the western sycamore is a riparian tree. It's typically like moderate to high water use. So I'm wondering if that's actually the best choice for the street tree, and whether or not we should use something that's more typical. So like the typical street tree on Park, I think, is the London plane, which is a related species, but it's like time tested and it's done pretty well in Palo Alto. So, and then on the blank facade, I think I would accept the blank facade, mostly because on other projects in Palo Alto, say for example, we looked at one recently in the research park. I think we've learned that that no planting is allowed. Like we would not be able to plant like screening trees along that edge for security reasons. And so it seems to me that the blank wall makes sense. And I suppose you could somehow put in some sort of decorative 2D motif on that. And the board has tried to do that on, say, like the University Avenue project in Kipling. I think it was like the 636 University Avenue. But the board went around and around, and we didn't really get anywhere or come to agreement on that. So I'm sort of hesitant to go down that route again. So that's where I am. I think I can generally recommend approval on this particular project with a few things to follow up with staff about. Thanks, Peter.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. Dave Hirsch, how about you step in this time ahead of Grace?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'd just like to start with the blank wall issue and the bar of backbone to this project of that solid element. And just get it out of the way because, you know, that electric yard is filled with kind of unusual equipment that we don't always see. So, and it sits up kind of like a sculptural element in that lot. It certainly would be better if there were more done with its perimeter. But you're kind of seeing that wall with that equipment in front of it. So that becomes kind of a sculpture against which the wall is seen. It isn't really sculpture, but it's interesting looking. And so I think it relieves the wall. And in fact, I think the wall being there is a really interesting contrast with the elements that are in that space. But that's not my main concern. I'm only mentioning it because it will undoubtedly come up again in our discussion. Thank you very much for the presentation. As an advanced schematic, it has all the elements we need, in my opinion, to review the project. And I say this because it deals with a little bit with the details that are necessary. It deals with the landscaping, et cetera. It really is a really quite complete schematic idea. I think we can see the clear intent to provide a kind of a simple, understated, elegant building with massing that is essentially compatible with the site's boundaries, the public electric service, and the Matadero Creek, and sensitive to the use of the exterior space. I'm impressed with the site planning, effectively using the car lift or garage to lessen the parking impact, and actually managing to slide one of those parking areas under the building the way it does. And I feel the use of the solid linear volume of all of the building service program, stairs, bathrooms, elevator, mechanicals, create a significant solid volume at the boundary of the electric service yard and acts as a visual anchor for the two distinct office elements. Except for the floor slab, I find the idea that this is a kind of renovation to be sort of a joke. And, you know, as Peter noted, you know, you're likely to take down the whole top of it at some point. But if that's not the case, okay. I will accept it because of what it does. It allows you to build this building. From my experience with 19th century structures, some of which have historic attributes, renovations require a different and much more detailed category of construction rehabilitation work in order to be called rehabilitations. But if it benefits this project, then all to the better. In any case, I find the painted stucco appropriate to the building function and the extended roofs and trellises as a shading device, as well as a dramatic expression of building planes, defines and dramatizes the building's geometry, provides an appropriate extension of the interior to the exterior. So all of those things seem to work very well. But since moving to Palo Alto 8 years ago, I've been impressed by the brightness and clarity of the sunshine and the freshness of the air as the fog recedes over the mountain. So I wonder why it is so necessary to seal in office buildings. This seems to me to be so contrary to environmental principles and antithetical to energy savings. The first floor, large square office space has a significant operable glass wall facing an expansive landscape terrace with a natural screen providing separation from the street. So it does not have this problem. But the adjacent narrower, deeper office area has one small door to this special garden area or refuge, also separated from the lightly trafficked Park Boulevard by vertical metal panels, as in the contemplative window water courtyard at Stanford. The second level, a much larger floor plan, has a limited area of what appears to be operable doors to the usable deck area, but is mostly enclosed by a repetitive fixed vertical windows. To me, this space is unnecessarily airtight and environmentally claustrophobic, seeming to satisfy an unnecessary rigid aesthetic of vertical floor-to-ceiling windows, fixed windows, that is. Given the design's generous and creative use of outdoor landscape space, this standard of inoperable windows seems contradictory. Why isn't it possible somehow to insert in those windows some more operable panels without disturbing the grid work? I'm hoping that others would agree that this is something that should be looked at. There is screening of freestanding fencing that faced the parking lot, and it interrupts the visual clarity of the building in the front. That is towards the parking lot, what is basically the front of the existing building. If the privacy of it is an issue there, then certainly ways to use a different kind of obscure glass. But I can't understand actually the purpose of that. And actually, I should have asked that question of the applicant. Maybe somebody else could deal with it later on here. The roof line for nearly the entire upper floor office area has a major overhang on all sides, except at the area facing Park Boulevard. And you can see that in this illustration here. Drawing A3.0A shows a residence with a roof projecting at an end condition, a similar expression of the end of the building. This would be a much more consistent and I believe more appropriate ending to this street-facing facade. And if it returned in line with the way the roof line is shown there, it would clarify the formal relationship between the glassy areas with their extended roof and the solid element that is against the electrical. And between the solid and transparent elements of the building itself. For one, I would like to see more study of this end of the building here. I don't quite see it from all of the different views that you see this kind of projecting steel structure. I'm very intrigued and happy with the method of the material usage here. Thank you for that. Showing that. With that exposed steel element. But if you go back to that, can you go back to that? But I'm really not, I don't understand this interconnection up here. This is really open to the sky in some way. And it's a strange connection at that end. And I really sort of feel if you had the roof line extending out over that, you could work with that corner and make it a better expression. That's my feeling, is that if you're really noting this and you rotate around the building and you see that cantilever of the roof line from the opposite side, it doesn't work for me. I think I'd rather see the expression of the cantilevered upper section of that roof. But even as an advanced schematic, I would recommend that any further issues could be discussed in committee, and I'm certainly prepared to approve this project. Even as a small office structure, this is a significant addition to the lexicon of high-quality buildings in Palo Alto. It is true to its function, sensitive to its detail throughout, even as a renovation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We may well come back to having the applicant address this cantilevered element for us, but let's hear what Grace thinks about the project first. Grace?
Yes, thanks. And I just want to thank our planning staff, Garrick, for your staff report and walking us through. I also want to thank the applicant. Wonderful to see Hayes Group packages come forward again. And thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. And nice to hear your voice, Ken. It's been a few years. I was not on the board. I did not sit on the board September 2018, but I see that this project has dramatically improved. So thank you for sharing where you came from and what you're proposing now. My comments will be rather brief. I concur with staff. I believe this is a terrific project and has met the findings and is ready. I'm thrilled to have it proceed. So I would be happy to approve. I accept Alex's, my fellow board member Alex's small additions. I believe that those make sense. I also concur regarding the street tree in terms of Park Boulevard and knowing what is there and how we can maintain some continuity. And the London plane trees would be terrific, or just to take a careful look at what's happening along Park. So I did have a few comments, and maybe these are small issues, and maybe it could come back to staff or subcommittee. The overall site diagram and massing, just terrific. And I actually can very much see this this proposal in the context where it sits. I don't have a hard time imagining it at all. I concur with my fellow board member David on your last statement. It is going to be a positive addition in this context. Now, on the south, the two-story flat wall, I also don't have any issues. I don't think it's a challenge. Given the transparencies and the massing and everything else that is happening along the edges, I think that flat will work well with the overall. However, if you want to pull up that view north from Park Boulevard, have some thoughts regarding the refuge. And, I do want to preface that the forecourt and the setback from the sidewalk is very inviting and wonderful and in many ways, both at the vehicular and pedestrian scale. And I guess I often come to the site coming down Lambert, between the Griffin and what is it, Aikens, and cross there, and I'm walking along that sidewalk, and I wonder about the just that inward focus on the refuge. I understand as a counterpoint, a quiet outdoor room, that all seems terrific for the program and the users. My worry is just the solidity when I see the city property, which will likely remain a blank solid wall, as well as the landscape treatment of that metal screen. And I feel like that's something that could be, I know you need the transformer, right? That you have to, you want to screen it and you're going to remove that screen there. I wonder about how solid that is on the sidewalk in terms of its maybe there's a way to create a refuge with an inward focus. However, that solidity is not a blank wall that continues. And it's a very short distance and you have that lovely lone tree. But perhaps your capable landscape consultant can think about, or maybe that's one more layer of design there in terms of having that solid screen for the transformer. However, something in that same language, and I feel confident given your precedent study images that you might be able to address that solidity there. And I guess the other piece that I wanted to mention, and I saw on your precedent study, you show on sheet A30A the roller shade system, the motorized exterior. And how wonderful, how transparent your building proposal is on the south and west facades. You will definitely need those motor shades. When I look at the materials board, what I saw was something very dark, and I maybe and I see in your renderings and your elevations that it actually shows in the printed set and online as not a heavy black. I don't think you want to emulate the current black shading on the existing building, but it is actually a significant part of the facade. And so I'm just wondering if you want to. My suggestion, and this, could come back to staff or to a subcommittee, is simply just looking at your precedent study in that image and thinking about the painted metal, which is I forget the name of the color there, but it's lighter, it's not black. And so given that it is enough of a surface area to maybe from across the street, you would see through that woven fabric and it wouldn't appear black, but I think it's worth taking a look at that color choice. Let's see. And then I guess the last piece, which I have, which is very minor, is the trees in the parking lot. So, and I understand how the shading, and you meet the city requirements. My small comment is just, why don't we see more evergreen trees in parking lots? Is that something, and maybe that's just a small one to consider. Just knowing, in terms of the two deciduous choices, maybe an evergreen choice would be appropriate. And with that, I will pass it on to Peter.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, that leaves me. I am not quite ready to recommend approval of this building today, although I think it is a handsome design, and I certainly appreciate its landscaping and the way it treats the street better than the previous version. But let me start with my concern about the existing structure. I'm all for saving the building and reusing it. I think it's a better thing to do. But I really think it'd be useful if the applicant could investigate more carefully what parts of the building really are going to be saved, and let us know if it really is coming down or not. Just as, if not for nothing else than for the public record, just to make it clear. What seems to be said right now is that everything is remaining, and I just don't think that's going to be the case. So I would like to see some additional engineering study of how that's going to be accomplished, if possible. I am concerned about the parking configuration for two reasons. I wonder if the applicant or someone could pull up for me. There's some images in the packet on page 4.1 and 4.2 of what that parking area in the back of the building between the additional structure and the building looks like. It's drawing number 4 on packet page A4.1. I thought I saw something in the presentation about that. Are we able to pull that image up? Whose screen is this we're sharing here?
This is my screen. I was just jotting that note down. What is the content of the image? It's
the back behind the new building, between the new building and the parking structure.
So is it a 3D view or is it a?
It's a 3D view. Yeah, I saw a 3D view of that earlier.
I can share that screen. I have it on my plan, so I'm already at that page. So let me just go ahead and do that.
It's in the upper left corner of A4.1. So what I'm concerned, there it is on the upper left corner there. I'm concerned about two things here. One is that by my reading of the plans, you're including that landscaping trellis cable structure as part of your screening. And I don't think the code supports that. So I think we'll need to just check that. But secondly, I think that's a pretty mean space, to be honest. It's a 25-foot wide space with no really human activity looking in on it. It's just doors of the parking garage on two sides and a blank wall. Maybe above you're looking down at it, although through the screening. But I think you can do more if you can modulate the building a little bit and get some activity there. And I worry that it's almost dangerous at night. This is a space somebody might be coming out to activate one of these lifts, and there's just no visibility anywhere from anybody. And I think this could be improved. I'd like to see some work done on the design of this space to just make it fit better somehow. Okay, thank you for showing that image. I then share the concerns of the staff, I guess, and some of my colleagues regarding the blank wall facing the power substation. I completely agree with the applicant's basic design decision to use that as a partition, a big screening element from inside the building. You clearly don't want to be looking at or orienting towards that electrical station. I get that. But from the public's point of view, coming down Park Avenue, that wall is quite visible. And it's really just a blank wall right now. What I'd really love to see is something done along the street in front of the power station as a compromise. If, for example, the applicant were to plant a row of trees down in front of that substation, or if they were to do something with that wall, that would dramatically mitigate the effect of the blank wall of their building. But I think either that is a possibility to explore, or to do something else to the wall of the building, maybe a transit line at the top of it, or some sort of decorative elements. But I think as it is now, it's just a large blank wall, and that doesn't speak well for anybody, and that will be quite visible. So I just can't support it until something else is done to mitigate the effect of that large wall.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I can speak just briefly to the comment about the trees along the substation. I've been working with utilities on a number of their projects within the substations around that, just in the whole city. And their primary mode or function of what they're doing right now is trying to eliminate any sort of means for which individuals will be able to access that space. So a lot of the things that they're doing right now are removing trees or maybe building the wall taller that they have around those substations. So I would envision utilities probably, while planning and other groups may support it, utilities may not be willing to allow them to do that. Planting trees in front of that area, they would certainly interpret that as creating another opportunity for people to access it. But and it's a conflict, I think, right now that departments are trying to deal with as it relates to how we look at the urban environment, and planting trees and making it kind of softening these, I wouldn't say unsightly, but less appealing features within the city. So I know that would probably be a challenge to do that specifically. But what you're saying about the articulation is, or some other modification on that wall, maybe something that'd be more that they'd be able to look at.
Well, thank you, Garrett. I understand that it may be very challenging to get yet another division of the city to cooperate where they don't want to the applicants. I guess I'm just offering that as a possibility. If it's easier or somehow in the cards to do something to that fence at the utility screen, or the landscaping, or the back wall of the building, I'm open to anything like that that can just mitigate a little bit the effect of that as you're going north along Park Avenue. The power station is going to be there as far as we can imagine into the future. So the view of this building will also be there. It's not going to get larger. And it's not that it's necessarily unattractive. All that equipment has a charm of its own, but somehow as it's going to be now, I think it's just not a positive thing. I applaud the landscaping at the front. The courtyard, I think, is a wonderful space. It's really going to be really neat the way the architect described it, even having the ability to walk through it at several passes. And I think it sets off a wonderful entrance into the building. The refuge space, however, I'm much less sanguine about. I think that from the inside, it's almost too closed in again. The portions of it aren't quite right. From the outside, those tall, I think must be steel plates, I think are a bit off-putting to the public. There must be a way to achieve that sense of a more quiet space and also have a softer landscaping barrier to it. And then I'm really unsure what to make of the shading structure that doesn't, I guess it has a cloth that drops down, but I don't quite understand how that's working over the front. And I think it might be better, as David suggested, just to have the roof cantilever out somehow and form the upper part of that. In any case, I've got to believe this is a talented group of architects, and if they were to take one more look at that whole assemblage up above, they might be able to come up with another way to treat that whole space. I think I'm also in sync with how Grace was feeling at the gut level about that the refuge area that can't just be improved a little bit. Then I think David's comment about having operable windows is perfectly valid. It's a small building still, and to the extent that we cannot rely on mechanical HVAC systems, that's all the better. I haven't gone through it in detail myself, but I would like to see that clearly spelled out where the windows are operable. I know Board Member Thompson would also appreciate that. So I'm in favor of having that looked at a little more carefully. Lastly, Alex, I want to take exception a little bit, I guess. You were pointing out in the findings that, trying to look at this now, it says, as the site is in a developed portion of the city, it is not considered prime habitat. I'm not quite sure what you're driving at there, but I don't think anybody would say that concrete creek channel is prime habitat right now. And I understand that we want to not not make statements that are not true or setting a precedent, but I don't want us to say that that creek is also a wonderful waterfront that the architects have to focus on and develop towards. So I'm not sure what your point was with that, but I think it is fair to say that it's not prime habitat right now. So that's the sum of my comments on this project. I'm in favor of continuing it, subject to the comments we've made. Any further discussion from anyone else?
I'll add just a few comments, and I appreciate all the fellow board members' comments. So one thing I was thinking about was the motorized shade, and Osma, our fellow colleague Osma, also referred to that structure, and so one thing that I did want to just comment on, not knowing, I have confidence the applicant might come back with some ideas, is the idea that, I mean, there is a need for shade and for the comfort of the users. And given the program, I'm just wondering how that motorized shade structure is recognized as an elevation, as part of a major part of the elevation. And, and then I just wanted to offer the perspective from, given where we live and its orientation and the amount of glass and my experience working in buildings like this, there is also internal motorized shade systems. Stanford does it on a lot of their buildings, as you know, and in Redwood City. And I just wanted to throw it out there just as a discussion, just for your further thoughts, applicant, in terms of how you proceed. But I do see that those shades as a big part of the elevation overall.
To the applicant, do you have any, would you like to address or ask questions or make sure you're clear on some of the comments we've made? It seems like
I'd like
continue your project, and I don't have a clear list of things for you, but I want to know what have you heard from us?
I'd like to, Peter, could I just insert a few more comments in between before they respond? Do you hear me, Peter?
No, that's fine, David. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, number one, I'd like to agree with your comment about the creek. It's clearly a concrete creek, the way it happens on this side of the road. It is, in fact, on this side of the road. Therefore, it is a little different than what it might be closer to where the residents would likely be. And I don't see that it is necessary to naturalize it from this point on. It has to, remain deep to go under the railroad, and then so it, I think there's enough to do just relating the building to the creek at that very corner, which was described by the architects, that that's going to be an issue for them probably to deal with, because the foundation of the building there will have some effect on the wall of the creek at that corner. So let's leave it at that. I think it's not an important issue. Another one, as you mentioned, that area in the back, and in looking at it while you were speaking about it, it seemed to me that there could be some protection to the actual walkway that is along the edge of the building, so that it might have a railing, a protective that keeps people from wandering into the line of traffic. It's not going to be overly used. It's going to be quite nice the way the concept of the greenery on the top when the Boston ivy grows all the way across, and the lighting hung from the center of that rather than protruding out or being from the wall structure, et cetera. It's a really clever idea, and it should light, once again, a kind of a night vision of that with a pattern of light on the ground might be quite interesting. But that could be handled with maybe a further lighting study, so that, that elements of the canopy, it might not be a single line of light. It might be a little bit more lighting thrown on the building itself as well as on the ground. So I would include that, as you point out, as an area of further study. for us to see. I rather like the idea of the solid element in the front and disagree with the problem with that being the refuse, no, not the right term. Recluse, no, that's not right. Whatever the term for that enclosed area. But there are other options for that. So I think that they should be studied. Perhaps it's not metal, but it's a glass element. So it still creates privacy. It's a diffuse glass that allows light to come through, but not to see the inside. And it's elements of glass instead of, I mean, that's just a suggestion. But I think there's further study in that area. And I'm happy to hear you all talk about the roof line. And actually Grace did not, and Alex did not, but I think that's an important element of the front. And in terms of the shading device, you know, what Grace just said kind of makes me think that it's very easy to imagine that a regular grid of vertical windows could include shading devices that are all automated on the inside that would come down when the sun came down. Yeah, sun was strong in that area, so the shades could pull down at that time and be a part of the whole system of how you enclose that you know, makes it an interesting layering of elements with the framework of the windows and the shading devices at different angles. So I just wanted to say that I'm as thrilled as Peter and everybody is about the garden in the front, adjacent to the one-story building. So I think that's going to be quite a nice space. And in fact, you know, the fact that it's a soft edge and inviting you to come into that area reinforces the idea of there being a somewhat harder edge, even if it's glass or whatever, in the contemplative garden area in front of the other portion of the building. The one thing about this is it is expanding the sidewalk already. So in an area where really there aren't going to be very many people walking, when you get to the other end and you're at the creek edge, the sidewalk narrows again. And so it's going to be just a small area where it gets wider and more appropriate in feeling. And then it's going to go back and be choked at the point of further progressing in the direction of downtown. So these are my comments in addition to the ones that have already been mentioned. I think that I would retract the fact that we could approve it at this point and say that it ought to come back for further discussion at another meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm afraid, Hayes Group people, that maybe one more round of design would be appropriate. I'd love to see this get approved next time round, and certainly appreciate the hard work you're doing. Do you understand, or do you have any questions about the comments we've made? Now's a good chance.
Do you have questions, Jeff, or I could say a few words?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Ken.
So yeah, it looks like you know, I was thinking we had 3 members that were ready to approve, provided we address some things like, I think the operable windows, board member Hirsch's recommendation was just an oversight. I mean, operable windows would certainly make sense at this location, and I don't have a problem with that being introduced to the project. The 2-story wall, something that you want us to address, although I kind of think that what Grace had said made a lot of sense. I mean, all that utility, all the wires, all the insulators and stuff, when the sun comes up and you just have a blank wall kind of as a backdrop, I think it's in an interesting, you know, you create interesting shadow on that wall. I'd much rather put the money into the building, right, out in front, as opposed to spending it on that wall that is really not that visible. The mechanized shades, So we really gave that a lot of thought. Should we put them inside? Should we put them outside? Inside, obviously, we do that all the time, but you're not really cutting out all the heat. The solar energy is still entering the building. A more effective way is to try to create shading on the outside. So, and it's obviously a much more expensive way to do it. But what we thought about it was that it's much more, makes a much greater statement about environmental awareness than having the shades on the inside. So having them on the outside makes, you start to see the building responding to its environment, and everyone else gets to see it do it as well. And so we thought that it was more of a, I don't know, not a public gesture, but I mean, it kind of puts it out there for everyone to see that, hey, this building is responding to the environment. At the front, again, round and around on that, the cantilever, obviously at the floor line, is there to be able to stretch the shades from roof cantilever to second floor cantilever frame. The reason we extended that out as a cantilever, where all the other shades are just right outside the glass, was so that the refuge below, when that tree grows, it's kind of held inside of that volume that's created by the shade being on the outside. And so the refuge is there for the ground floor, but also potentially for the second floor. If that shade came back, it's just a different experience. So we thought that it would be really neat to be in that space. You look up, the shade comes down. Now you've got this 2-story outdoor refuge kind of space. But if you want us to look at that, we can look at that, but that was our reasoning. Operable windows are easy. The rear parking area, I like the idea, maybe festoon lights that could be introduced on the cables that come across that space, and it could make that space a little bit more lively, and perhaps introduce some bollards or something instead of a railing along the walkway to protect people that are walking there. I actually like the severity of that space, where you've got edges all around. So, and then the existing building, Peter, despite some other projects. All right, so we beat the appeal at council on Monday night, right? Which was the right decision.
You were very good in that one, yes.
Which was right decision. At 480 Lytton, just my 2 cents, we did keep 20% of the existing wall. All the concrete wall was kept. On this building, we're going to do our best to keep the solid CMU block. And once we decided to keep that, it informed everything about the site plan. And it led to that whole concept with the bar and then the circulation space in between. The front part that we're tearing down is all wood frame, and it's terrible. It's 2-story, terrible ceiling height. So that's going to be removed very easily. And Hobach and Lewin has already done an analysis on the CMU. Obviously the roof's coming off, but we're having to put brace frame. I mean, the CMU could come down, but it's all going to be brace frame. So on the inside, but if we can keep it, we're going to try to keep it.
I'd appreciate, Ken, if you guys can just put together a demolition plan for us. And, we had this discussion when you were talking about the Mills building, and I asked you specifically how much of those bricks are going to stay and what are you going to do? And you had a really good answer about it, but didn't seem to pan out with the engineering. And
well, so the answer now is,
on me, second time I'm asking you to show us a little more carefully what the engineering is really going to be. You've got some good engineers.
Sometimes, yeah, the project gets in front of the engineering. We're keeping the bricks, Peter, on the Mills building.
I know, I understand. And I'm all for you doing this. I think it's a great thing to do. I don't want to get in the way of preserving these buildings or reusing the way you're doing. It's all good stuff.
Okay, great.
My question to you, Ken, had been though, do you understand what we're saying? It sounds like you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. And we may come back, with we'll come back with some options. But we'll certainly have a preference still, I think.
But what I'm hearing from the 4 board members here now is that at least David and I have clearly said, I think it's one more round of design. I heard Grace say she's ready to approve it now. And Alex, I'm not sure where you stand on this. But I guess I want to give Grace a chance to persuade us. If you think it can be approved today, Grace, how do you think so?
Well, I just wanted to say a few words because I don't think I said enough about the blank wall. And if that is something that fellow board members are concerned about, I agree with the applicant. I do not think that it is going to be seen as much as as we do when we see an elevation in a set or on screen. There are oblique views that occur as you are coming down Park naturally towards Cal Ave. However, it is what it is. This is this use, and you said it, Peter, it's not going away anytime soon. There are perhaps some views coming down Lambert, but I don't think so. I actually, when I wrote my notes after visiting, I did not write the blank wall. I only actually wrote it because it was directed from staff. So for me, that's not a challenge, that blank wall. And I think there's enough variety in the materials and the massing where I don't think that it will be a strong challenge for other people just to be focusing on those other elements. The other piece that I want to mention, and thank you, Ken, for explaining, is my original comment about the shade structure was truly the color in terms of it just, and perhaps you see through that weave in terms of transparency.
Yes.
But I do think that that's simply was my comment in terms of the actual color that wraps around the building. That's black. And so I just wanted to note that. Perhaps Board Member Liu also would want to just weigh in, and then we can go back, back and forth in this discussion if you feel like it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give a fair, clear hearing to everybody. If the majority of the board wants to approve it today, then that should be something we push for. Before Alex starts, though, I'd like to mention that I just don't think that the 50% screening on the parking is there yet. And I think that's a significant change. They're going to have to do something. Those landscaped vines have been included in their calculation, and the code doesn't allow for that, as I understand it at least. So I think that needs to be changed, and that's more than a subcommittee can address, I believe. Alex, where do you feel on this? Where do you land on this, Alex? Do we continue it?
Yeah, I actually don't really have anything else to say on this particular project. So I'm leaving it up to you, the three of you. It seems like Osmo is opposed to the blank wall. So I can go either way. Since there are only 4 of us, it seems to me that this is going to need to come back.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get your opinion. And okay, you're saying you're on the fence then. So I'll move that we continue this project to a date uncertain, subject to the comments we've already made. Do I have a second for that?
I second that.
Okay. Jody, do you understand clearly enough? Do you feel that we've given you enough guidelines to talk to the applicant about it?
Yes, I think between the board members and, Ken was highlighting some of the main comments. The shade calculation was the other one that I picked up. The only thing I didn't hear about was the refuge fence kind of around that transformer area. I didn't quite know where we landed on that.
Yeah, I don't think we quite did. It's an odd circumstance, but I think the consensus of the board is that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're just a little bit confused by it, perhaps. So
okay, and maybe I think Board Member Hirsch was talking about maybe just a different material. So maybe it's something along those lines.
Yeah, it might just be that it's a unique enough idea that it'll take us a while to get our heads around. I'm sorry, Ken, I don't know what else to say to you on that one. It is something we haven't seen before here. And maybe you're right that it's best to put the shading outside and express the environmental concerns that way. Okay, well, right now we have a motion moved and seconded. Let's have a vote on that, please. Veronica?
Yes. Chair Bolte,
Yes?
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Nay.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Thomas is absent. So the motion passes 3-1.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Hayes Group, for your presentation. It's very nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, Noah. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, our next item is a study session. No, it's just the letter. Do we need another 5-minute break, everybody? No? Okay. So let's keep moving along then. Let's see, on our agenda, the study session for ex parte communications has been postponed. I just think that Ozma needs to take part in that discussion, and she's not with us today. We do have the draft of the letter to council, which I feel strongly we want to get put together. Does anybody?
Chair Balte,
yes, Jody.
I believe we have the minutes first for November 5th.
Well, you want to do them? Oh, fair enough. Okay, let's first do the minutes from November 5th. Do you have any comments or a motion on that, please?
I will make a motion that we approve the minutes for November 5th, 2020.
Do I have a second for that?
I can second.
Seconded, moved and seconded. Let's have a vote, please.
Chair Balte,
Yes?
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson is absent, so the motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Okay, next item is board member questions, comments, or announcements. Alex, do you have any information about your North Ventura project?
Yeah, so there's going to be a presentation at the Planning and Transportation Commission next week on Wednesday, December 9th. The day beforehand, the planning staff is going to have an open house question and answer session. So that's Tuesday, December 8th at 5:30 p.m. And then nothing's happened with regard to the committee since last month.
Okay. So nothing else to report on that, Alex?
So I think people may have seen in the news that there's a townhouse proposal being proposed for the for part of the Fry site by Sobrato. But that would go to the council first.
Yes, and if the public's interested, there are several websites. Probably the easiest if you go to the Planning Department projects. On our pending projects page, you'll see 200 Portage Avenue, and there's some additional details about that project, and also the SB 330 process. But this is one of those projects where we're starting to get some of those housing projects that are using the state streamlining, and this is why those objective standards start to be so important. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Thanks, Jody. Thank you, Alex, for that report. Then, before we adjourn, I'd like to get feedback from members of the board regarding our annual letter to council. I'd like to reinforce to everybody that we're requested by code, the municipal code, that we provide this letter once a year. We did it last year. I'd like to establish a precedent or a practice of doing it at the end of each year as the outgoing chair takes the lead to push this across the finish line. To that effect, I've written up this draft based on feedback from our last meeting. I'd like to get comments and feedback at this meeting. And my hope is that we can have a final draft circulated before our next meeting, and then we can vote to approve it. I think it really speaks well for us as a board to be consistent and provide this feedback, whatever it is, to the City Council and the Planning Commission on a regular basis at the end of the year. So I strongly want us to produce something. I would much rather just eliminate things we can't agree on, but put out what we do agree on. To that effect, I structured this as having five pieces, A, B, C, D, and E. So at the beginning, does everybody see, is this the right grouping of things? Are things in here we just shouldn't be talking about? And then if so, what do we think about these individual items? So is there any feedback on the topics themselves?
I just want to thank you, Peter. I think this letter is very well written. I do have some comments and questions, and I'm going off of I don't know if everybody's looking at it, what Jody sent this morning. It's the marked up copy with Ozma's and Jody's comments.
Yes, I've tried to circulate. Jody put some comments on a Word document, and so is Ozma now. And I wish, and maybe we could get a letter from the attorney, if it's possible, just to be circulating this kind of document without violating the Brown Act.
Yeah, yeah, that would be helpful.
It just
because-
seems ridiculous to have to do it this way.
Yeah.
I mean, Jody, at this point, we're halfway done with it, but Jody, it really would be useful if we could find out. I just can't see how this violates, it's not a quasi-judicial issue. It's just an operation of the board. In any case, I've left Jody's comments in there, very helpful, and I want to have that included. But continue, Grace, please.
So if I may, though, the first question, Peter, is this a letter? In the past, it has been emailed to council members, and then it looks like we're going to email to planning, the PTC as well. And how do they discuss and give us feedback on this letter, and how do we receive it?
Well, there is no process or stipulations for that. It's up to the council to decide what they want to discuss, honestly.
Okay.
Last year, I made a big push that we presented in person, and I really, Jody will tell you, I just refused to accept having it just emailed to council members. And that's where we got that big presentation in front of the council. They indulged us and we got this big thing. This year, given the situation the city's in with the virus impact and a couple of really pressing planning issues, I think we should just email it to them.
Okay.
I don't feel strongly that we want to.
My question was also the date in terms of new council or old council. We will receive.
Well, that's up to the council again to decide. We send it to them at the end of the year.
Right.
I would think the council members are eager to hear this, but maybe not. But it's nonetheless incumbent upon us just to put this out there.
Well, how about if we just ask if it can go to the old council and the new council? Is that something that's possible? Or is it always that we give it to by the date, the council that is no longer? I'm just wondering if there's a way, since, this is an end of the year, but it might be nice for both old and new to receive this.
I don't see any harm in asking this to have it circulated to all new and old council members.
Yeah.
We just have to be careful that we're asked to provide a report. We're not asked to tell them what to do or to give them direction. It's just, what have we seen over the course of the year? And I don't want to be seen as insisting on things. It's really the council's job to drive policy and decide what they want to hear and think about. So it's just incumbent upon us to tell them what we're seeing. That's at least how I see all this.
Okay. Well, what I really appreciate about this letter in draft form is that it is a summary of things that this group has noted, but it also does provide some suggestions, and I see our role as an advisory group to the council. I just marked up this letter with some thoughts. I don't know if you want to just go and circle with each.
Well, I've got my pen ready to write them down because that's how we seem to work in the age of virus here.
Yeah.
But just talk away.
Okay. So, I mean, I can just quickly go through. I just have a few thoughts. And, on the first one, the hybrid model, I appreciate it. I do think the meetings are better in person. However, I do think it's important to do this in a non-pandemic world for safety. A hybrid model for seeing materials, boards, and all of that. I'm actually fine looking at the materials boards through a piece of glass. But if other board members feel like they want it open to touch the materials that Ozma had noted, I'm open to discussing that.
So board member Lee, if I may, when I was discussing the hybrid model, I guess what I was thinking is that after COVID, when we are able to go back to chambers, would we still want to have some sort of Zoom component where other members of the public could participate?
Yeah, I mean, Ozma brings up a good point too, that she herself is able to do more in Zoom. I do see a benefit in that. I do. However, the alternate approach is the letters, right? So I just wanted to point out there is opportunity to write. However, you're missing the discussion lifetime. I think a lot of impediment is the timing of the meetings during work hours on Thursday mornings is my feeling. I do read the letters, and if there's, I don't know if we want to discuss how we could emphasize that letters are important. I think that's really on the applicant side to make sure about letters and community members' interest. The one thing I did want to mention is, I do like this idea of having the ARB just make suggestions. For example, these corridor design standards, El Camino's 2005, right? SOFA's 2000, early 2000s. And SOFA 2 is also early 2000s. I think it's time for San Antonio design guidelines, and we should weigh in. I feel like joint meetings with full boards are rarely productive. I do want to stress that. I've been to several, and there's just too many members for it to be productive. And so I think the leads should meet, and the leads of each board should reach out to their individual board members to make sure that they're represented. And then I do have some thoughts on the objective design standards, but I also can wait on that if others want to weigh in. That was my only other thing is.
Let's come back to that particular topic, Grace, because I think that's going to be a bit more of an issue there.
Sounds good.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on the first idea, the notion that we're just giving them feedback on remote design review? How has it worked for us over this past year, and should we be entertaining, a hybrid system in the future? Any other thoughts on that? Is what I wrote in this letter about accurate that we can all support? Okay, then I think we'll leave it like this. I'll add Jody's comment that a hybrid model might work in the future. We don't really have a strong opinion. Okay, on the San Antonio corridor design standards, does that belong in this report? As much as I think we all agree it's necessary, Jody points out that there's already something going on. Is that right, Jody?
The council has already directed planning staff to come back to them, but certainly the ARB, can help support that effort.
So you think it's beneficial for us to say that we think this is something that you really need?
Yes.
Other members of the board support that again? David and Alex?
Yes, I do. And I think it's very important to bring it up to the council.
Okay.
And I actually, I guess there are design standards now for El Camino South, but
well, Bruce mentioned that there's standards there, but they're now pushing 15 years out of date?
Right.
More, and we're struggling with that. This base, middle, top thing. I think we would probably write a different standard if we were writing it today.
Exactly. I think,
but
equal to.
I think if you just tell the city council, look, all the standards need to be revised, that's basically saying nothing.
Yeah.
We have struggled with San Antonio Road. Several projects just has no design standard whatsoever. And I think that leaves applicants and us struggling a little bit. Does the board support that this is important enough that we're mentioning it here? It's one of 5 topics.
I would support expanding it to El Camino.
Alex and Grace, do you think we should also include a statement about the El Camino standards? I think that's too much, David. I think we're better at keeping a focus tight.
You have to eventually do it, Eventually it's got to come up. So Alex, maybe you could talk to it.
Well, I guess I'd go first.
Shall I add a sentence about that then? Grace, do you want me to do that?
Well, I feel like we should say that the standards that we review, they are really old. I know that's not productive in terms of time and staff and how we can do these, but I think it is very important to point out we are looking at standards that are outdated without examples of the past decade or 2 decades in those standards. I think it's a problem.
Okay, it's appropriate.
And it's not easily solved, but I feel like it's important.
Okay, I'll add something to that effect, and we'll circulate it. It's very important to me that we have enough consensus to all be able to vote on this. I want it to be unanimous. It's got to be something that we all agree on. So please, now is the time to discuss it differently. I don't want to get close to a vote and then find we have a problem. Okay, gang? The third item was regarding communication between City Council, Planning Commission, etc. This is coming from your comments, Grace, the other day about wanting to see some way of getting together with all this. Does this come close to what you were thinking? You want to make any suggestions on it?
Yes, and I appreciate the liaison. I feel like, and Alex, you can remind me, but it was before you came on, we did have a liaison. I mean, it was back in 2005. And Jody, maybe Amy knows, because I feel like there was a city council liaison for ARB and HRB and PTC. But in any case, I think it would be helpful to have some formalized channel or just a, a way that that communication can occur.
Yeah, I think I was here and started here in 2012, so I didn't see an ARB liaison, but there certainly was an HRB liaison in the past, in the more recent past. So I was just offering in this letter that, if you wanted to talk to the HRB chair and just sort of see how that played out and how that could best be used or not.
I'm happy to give Dave Bauer a call and ask his opinion. What I've heard from council is that they felt that the ARB was a little more political and it wasn't so easy for them to decide on who would be a liaison for the ARB and the Planning Commission. I think what we're trying to say to them here is, independent of their politics, we think it would just be better communication. And that's really what we're looking for.
You know what my opinion about this, all of this, is not, liaisons aren't all that helpful somehow. Depending upon the detail of the report. What concerns me about some of the way in which we, the city approaches presenting information that we get ourselves in our report, is that there's, the whole of the minutes that we have are so detailed, and absolutely everything that everybody has spoken, that the reality is what we really need is a kind of a summary sheet, and what I depend upon somehow is Palo Alto Online review of the meetings. And that's not sufficient either. It's kind of one-sided frequently. So my personal preference is some kind of a summary sheet of what information, what these meetings have, the major issues that they've addressed, and then share them between us rather than just a liaison.
Yeah, so you're asking about a summary of council meetings?
Summary of planning and transportation, our own meetings, summaries of our own meetings, so that they're available in general. Then that information would, I think, be useful and not so difficult, not 150 pages of reading. Summary of the decisions that have been made, and I just think it's a better way of communicating information.
So you don't think a liaison necessarily is what we should be saying is a good idea, David?
I don't.
Okay, and instead you think that we should be asking, I guess it would be staff to prepare a one-page summary of our meetings to circulate to the entire city?
One or 2 pages, or maybe even 3 pages, whatever it is, to get the full intent of the decision. I think it can, these meetings can be summarized rather easily. We're wordy people, and the wording is great, but we don't need it all when we're talking about what actually was decided and what was important.
Okay, that's a new idea. How do we feel about that? Grace, what do you think? You've been around.
I have a worry that what we're asking is too much for staff, given just how many meetings and how long-winded we are. I actually feel like the chair of each board, generally over the years, has been so responsible as a voice, and certainly, Peter, I feel comfortable you representing what happened in a meeting. I do think that the communication that can occur, if not violating the Brown Act, but if that might occur between the chair, I feel like that's really separate from the meetings. It is the role of the chair or vice chair to represent the board to another chair or vice chair or liaison. I also feel like the liaison of the council may not agree with everything that's happened in each meeting. However, that simple communication, and maybe there are touch points related to major projects, or maybe quarterly, or even at the halfway mark of the year or halfway mark of our term, would be productive.
Okay, so you're just saying having more feedback formalized, Grace. That makes sense too.
Yeah, just touch points that are not onerous on anybody, but right now there's nothing. So, and over the years, I feel like communication is important at certain moments that are scheduled on a calendar. I just feel like it's just doing work.
Scheduled meetings, yeah. Well, if we emphasize in our letter that we just feel that the communication is lacking, and we could put forth a few ideas they may consider, a liaison or a summary letter of each meeting. Is that getting close to what everybody can support?
Yes.
Yeah. Alex, you're very silent. Is that because you're just agreeing with everything?
I'm just listening. I hear like a lot of very different conflicting things between the board members and what I've heard from council. So yeah, I'm just having a hard time reconciling all of this together. I don't really disagree with having more communication. I don't really agree with the liaison. I think in the past, you know, a previous planning director did a monthly report highlighting what each board did.
Yeah.
And so it was a really quick way for everybody to see, oh, you know, HRB had an issue with the project, but the ARB liked it, and then it went on to planning commission or council. I mean, we don't really have that anymore. So it's sort of, I think that all of us have to go and search out the information, you know, through media or meeting minutes. So it's pretty time consuming. And I think Mountain View has been doing monthly reports pretty consistently, but they don't really have all the same boards that we, so it's easier for them to do it.
That's a good idea, Alex.
Yeah, if I can, I do think the previous planning director had some public outreach help. And so that helped with that sort of report.
Yeah, I don't think we want to put something out there, Jody, that just makes more work for your staff arbitrarily or even intentionally. You guys have a lot to do. We understand that.
Well, there was additional staff to deal with that is part of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that what we're saying consistently is that we just don't feel there's that much communication between us and council or us and other boards. So I'll structure this letter with a series of loose ideas, I guess. And that's really up to council anyway, how they would want to take this up if they do. The last two subjects, I'm going to skip. The very end one was just trying to put forth the work we do is important to the city. I've heard council members refer to that. I'd like to just have a few images of projects and stuff. I can't imagine anybody has a problem with that, but is that all okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but could we just make sure the architectural review, the list is complete?
Well, that's the second half. Is the list complete or should we take things off?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Right.
For example, the really exciting housing project that's on its way up on Hamilton wasn't on the list.
Oh, I was trying to think of ones that they can actually see that are built.
Right, I know. So does that mean the ones that are in construction will be taken off the list?
I thought these were finished now. Or, well, I guess they're not all finished. No, of course not.
Yeah.
So
And we could do before and after, you know, with the plan sets.
Yeah, well, my idea was to try to get an image of a before and after image of what the first came to us and what was built. I was really struck looking at the Marriott Hotel in San Antonio. The end result is really attractive relative to where we started. But I just wanted to get quick images on both, if that's feasible.
that's good, but you could add to that the images of projects that are coming up that are worth keeping an eye on.
Absolutely. So what other things should we add to this again, David? You said the housing one on the corner of Hamilton, is it?
Yeah, next to the church there. I don't know.
565 Hamilton.
So we approved that design and we could show then the initial design and the final approved design?
Yes, Yeah, that's good.
I'm not, honestly, David, I'm not sure that the council members are going to notice the difference all that much without really looking hard at it.
Maybe not, because that's a good design when it came in.
It was good to begin with, and
Yeah.
we pushed hard about the compatibility and stuff like that, but they don't, I don't think they see that unless they really look at it carefully.
Unique kind of housing project, open on the bottom the way it is, the mix of the commercial in there and the.
There's some merit to just showing what's coming up that's good. I'm not sure that's reinforcing the architecture board as much.
No, it has an awful lot in it.
Okay, well, we'll put that project in here. Anything else?
I was wondering if it's possible to add, in addition to the address, just what it is. So for example, Wilton Court is 59 units of affordable housing. And I guess I had a different view on these. I thought that we were going to show a photo of the site as it is now. And you said, you know, former Foot Locker, because some of them are, you know, they're completed, former Olive Garden. But I think I guess my feeling is that lay people, and I just feel like they're not going to see the difference between a rendering and a final. I think it's pretty compelling to see what was at that site or what it was there before, and then what has been approved, or what it is in terms of permit. I felt like that was important.
I think that's a good point, Grace. Sure, just showing, you know, from nothing to the new building is powerful if we can dig up those images. Okay, I'll take that, see if we can make that happen. Any other thoughts about this thing about architecture review buildings? Okay, that's going to be a necessity, also limited by just how much research time we have and facts and stuff we have. I want to take care of it as the chair, but I can't do that for every one of these. Then objective design standards. It occurred to me that that's, I think, something that all of us have commented at some point or another, that objective design standards will result in a lower quality of design consistency in the town. And at least to me, I feel strongly that we're going to have to do this, but I don't want it to seem like the architecture board is giving it its blessing. I don't think it's a good idea. It's just one we've been forced into.
Yes.
And I'm trying to sort of find a way to say that so it's loud and clear to the council and the public. That's where we stand. Is that something we support?
I would say yes. But one thing I did want to make sure is, I appreciate this draft and I agree with pretty much everything here, but I wonder if others had thoughts on that last paragraph under D. And then also I had questions regarding our process and timing and how we are. Because and thank you, Jody. I saw your question. What have you heard from other architects that built in PA in Palo Alto? And I just wanted to circle back and see if we are going to be able to share stakeholder feedback, if we are going to be able to share this letter or at least this section with stakeholders so that they might understand, if we shared a link of the current draft and they provided feedback, where we are as a group in our previous discussion and what we feel about objective design standards. And I guess the last piece I just want to make sure about, I'm hopeful that we can just add one sentence that talks about affordable housing as, you know, rather than just residential, that there's something about how we all are thinking about objective design standards regarding affordable housing versus market rate or, you know, mixed use.
So I'm looking at that last paragraph, Grace. It's a rather long paragraph, and you're suggesting that we.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to Jody's comment on need planning support, right? In terms of the streamlined review and other departments. And then when Jody, when you asked what have you heard from other architects that built in Palo Alto, it just reminded me that, you know, maybe we could share what this idea of, and how do we get feedback from other architects in Palo Alto. So there's that piece. But then also I just had the question in terms of objectives design standards draft, when is that coming back? Do we have an idea of when that's coming back to us? And I had shared with Jody for some images, some example graphics So I just want to make sure that's being shared, or what the timeline's going to be for our meeting.
Yeah, right this minute, I haven't been able to spend a lot of time on objective standards. I'm looking up because we had a possible date for the next hearing. I want to say it was in January, but I think that might have to be pushed out so that we can do some of these other things. Yeah, we had January 7th is a tentative date so far. And so, but that means we got to do a lot this month if we're going to, you know, sort of get information from other architects and things. So.
And then thank you, Jody. So I just want to make sure on the current website that is the draft standards, is it just simply the draft that we had before we had our last meeting? To share
yes, I don't think that webpage has been updated quite yet. And we haven't had a chance to talk to the subcommittee either. So,
so it sounds like that won't change this month.
I think this month I will try and talk to David and Osma about getting a subcommittee so that at least maybe we could get that next round up on the webpage. Right. So then people would have some more time to digest it.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, that's from my standpoint too. You know, I feel like it's kind of we're a bit in the dark here as to what's going on, and I don't know about Osma's feeling, but if it's progressing, I think I would like very much to see how it's progressing. I think one of the concerns that we talked about at the last meeting was that the drawings were in a way more desperately needed than the textual part, but everything has to fit together, and so I'm anxious to see how it progresses and what the actual schedule is, you know, if there is one, or can it be stretched out? What is the kind of end schedule for the whole of this requirement of the state?
Yeah, I mean, well, there is no state required schedule other than, you know, if we don't have these in place and we get an SB 35 project, then there really are very minimal objective standards that they would have to abide by. So we don't want to be in that position. So, you know, getting them done as soon as possible is the best idea. We were trying to get them done, you know, at the end of this year. That's, you know, not going to happen, you know, given the pandemic and everything else. So at this point, we're just trying to get them done somewhat quickly, but, you know, we want them to be good quality as well. So we're, you know, balancing those two things, but I'm hoping in the early part of next year, we will be done. And yeah, you haven't missed anything, David. You know, there's been a lot going on. So I will get back with the subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
My intent with the letter was to just make the basic statement that objective design standards are, in our opinion, not as good as the subjective architecture board review. And just so the council hears that from us. I think if we go into more detail about the standards and the process we're doing them, it quickly gets too complicated. But I don't know if this, so far, if the draft reflects that or if we have a different opinion collectively.
Well, you know, now we're having a meeting. I just wanted to share with everybody something about objective, subjective. I had a conversation with my cohorts in my previous New York office, and the comment was that it was entirely objective, the New York City zoning and building code. And of course, there's no art, historic, whatever review of projects in the city, except for projects that have city funding. So that 98% of the projects in New York are simply based on a code that is totally objective. Quite a difference. There is no control except the economics of construction, really. However, it's just a different place, of course, you know. But the rules actually require a certain amount of architecture, clearly, you know, the setbacks and all of the limitations that are normally applied through the zoning are not so bad, really. They establish a lot of rules and regs, so you get a very commonplace building that fits in with the other commonplace buildings. And you have to really work at making something quite unique that is subjective.
Are you suggesting, David, that we should not mention this then? Should we just leave subjective, objective off of our letter? And
no, I think it's very worthwhile mentioning it. I would even imagine that as much as the council itself might be objecting to the rule of the state in our affairs, they might be concerned about how we present this, and it's important for them to hear it. So I'm very pleased with Peter, with your letter and the breadth of the items that are on it.
okay, thanks. So what I'm hearing is that we more or less leave this intact. Are there any other topics that we didn't put in here that somebody thinks we should have?
Chair Balte, Amy French was just reminding us that the 2020 ARB awards did not happen because of, you know, COVID.
Yes.
And so maybe we just mentioned that we would pick that up next year.
That's a good point, of course. We'll put that in. Thanks for the catch. So the awards are going to be postponed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do the same time frame. It's just the ceremony and the choosing would be later.
We'll pretend 2020 never happened, right?
We're all trying to do that.
Yes, we are indeed, boy. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Jody, I'd really like to.
Sorry, Peter, can I just add one more thing?
Please, Grace, go ahead.
Objective design standards. I feel like there should be an opening sentence in terms of our board understanding the need for the intent of the state law to streamline discretionary review for housing given the need. I just feel like, you know, right now, I appreciate this paragraph, but I feel like and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like our board understands why this is needed, particularly for the most needy in housing. I feel like that should come across, and we're abiding in this way.
I see.
I can support that, sure. I mean, I think that the state law fundamentally is doing a good thing. Do other board members support that? Well, I'll take silence as yes. I'll put that in there, Grace. I appreciate your feedback. It's good to have that.
You know, if we're using this opportunity to speak to the affordable housing, supportive housing, or affordable housing, let's say, that's the right term for it here. My own personal idea here that for solving this kind of a problem, why don't we actually consider not making a recommendation, but expressing an idea that might be possible? At least I'm going to do it with all of you. Why not use the PF zones? I've mentioned it before. Maybe Alex would speak to why it doesn't work, but why not suggest that the city actually get involved in studying the PF zones to provide housing, affordable housing, a greater density, change only the PF zones themselves. So I'm talking about all the parking lots around downtown. There's a tremendous benefit in working in this area because the zoning could be easily changed to provide greater density. It's not adjacent to residential communities. The city owns the property, which means it could negotiate with developers for a good deal for a more skewed development towards affordable housing. The parking could be retained as part of the whole development. The city could continue to own the parking lot. It seems to me that it's a win-win situation. And
David, you and I have had these discussions, and I think we support this is a great idea. I just think it's not the purview of the ARB. We don't review projects about how the zones are done. And we run the risk of overstepping our bounds.
So here's an idea. I'm just expressing an idea. I'm not saying we do anything yet. I'm asking for discussion. We don't actually make recommendations for planning like this. It's really the planning department that ought to do it, planning and development, planning and transportation, because it is both planning and transportation, but they're not doing it either because we're all reacting. We are kind of a reacting agency. Our project comes in and we review it. But when you look at the whole thing as a planner, you see this possibility. Alex, I'd like your opinion on it actually, because this is something that I think you've looked at for a long time. The issue of the zoning of the downtowns. Is it possible to imagine that? I know that you've mentioned the fact that Mountain View has really begun to do some major developments that have made a significant change in that community. And Palo Alto hasn't actually done this on a large scale the way Mountain View has. What do you think about the possibility of doing this in a downtown, our downtowns around California Street and University?
Yeah, well, David, I think that's in our comp plan. If you looked at the comp plan, it's in there, and this council has added a zoning mechanism to make that happen, right? So you can add a housing overlay on a PF zone. So I think that's all there. The council's talked about that in years past. So I think that they've made their intent clear. Like, I don't think that that we need to say anything about it. I mean, at this point, I think we could just say that it's an opportunity that's still out there. But I would leave it at that because this is really more of a report. I think if you wanted to add this, I would add it in the section just about housing, right? So, like, council member Niz is always asking, how many units have been improved? Where are we? So if we were responding to something like that, we could say, we've approved this many units of housing, and then I would say, then you could add, there are all these other opportunities that are out there, and just leave it in that section.
That's a great comment.
Which section are you talking about, Alex?
Well, it's not a section. I'm saying if there were a section on housing, right? Because that's been one of the council's objectives. We could report on how many housing units ARB has approved recently, and then we could also highlight where we think there are missed opportunities.
That's a good point, Alex. Really good point. It could sort of be because, after all, objective subjective is really about building housing, and somehow expand it to answer it the way you suggested. I think would be a good way to put it.
So we're suggesting adding one more topic where we talk about housing that the ARB has recommended approval for, and then lost opportunities, like David suggested, as a part of our annual report.
Possibly. And then I think there would be one other thing under housing, which is like Councilmember Tanaka is always talking about micro units
Right.
as a little part. So we might want to just highlight the sizes of the units.
Well, that would be accessory dwelling units you're talking about?
So these are like the small studio apartments.
Small apartments, okay. But what do we, as the architecture board, and what are we reporting about it? That they work, that we can find them approvable, that they're too tight, that it takes too long to approve them? What's our statement about it?
Yes, no, I think the issue is that we actually have approved them, right?
True, we have.
In the past, the density limits, right, typically would preclude micro studios, because then you're talking about something at like 100 units per acre, right? And our zoning is for 40 units per acre maximum.
I think, okay. Certainly the council
So
would like to have a number like that. It's useful.
Yeah. Anyway, I would only, I mean, my thought about including that was just because it's something that one of the council members is frequently mentions it.
That's a good point.
I was just
Are
going
you
to
able to help figure out these numbers? It's just a bit of research to do.
Yeah.
Or somebody?
If you're asking about units approved
Yeah.
this year, yeah, I'm working on it as we speak.
Grace, do you support putting this topic in there?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, to make it kind of work with what we have, would it be appropriate to highlight the addresses that are housing and have a key, that an asterisk that says housing or residential, and then in the description,
Great idea.
highlight housing incentive site, or the units, in that one sentence description with the address. That might be a way to do it without calling out a whole new section. So clearly you've highlighted what the council's interested in, and it's a descriptor in the section where you actually see a photo of the site.
I think that's brilliant, Grace. Very good. Okay, so we're going to take section E, and we're going to make sure that it clearly shows what housing is being approved. And then at the bottom, we'll put a paragraph about lost, or a line about lost opportunity with the PF zones. Is that something we can all support?
Yes, yes, but I have to say that my concept, or a concept here, would be that somehow or other, if the city were to be more proactive in developing their own housing, it certainly would be a possibility. It would mean something like creating a housing department that was somewhat separate from planning, in order to kind of organize the whole effort for an entire area like the PF zones, and perhaps a broader view as well, depending upon, comments like Alex makes about what is there in the code for these various zones and for the densities. That's of course a bit, I don't think we're going to get into that in this particular meeting, but I think it's something that is done in very many cities, certainly was done in New York City many times now, where there have been certain kind of czars created who take an area of the city, and like in the Bronx, and have constructed incredible numbers of housing units at a time when it was possible to get properties easier than it is now.
David, I appreciate you wanting to bring that up, and it's a very good idea, but it's noon. I want to get this meeting done. The purpose is to get the letter, the report that we can all agree on.
Mentioning this because, yes, we should all move on.
Okay, listen, Jody, I'd like to find a way for me to finish a revision of this by the end of the week. And is there any way we could circulate it to board members and get feedback before I produce the final document? You think we can make that work?
I talked to the attorney and he did say that because this is board business, this is part of the mission of the board, that it does need to be done in a public setting for the most part. So, I mean, if there's one-way communication to me or something like that,
Okay.
that's
Well,
fine.
then look, to my colleagues, I will put forth a final draft of this. Let's see, I'll promise to have it done by the end of the weekend, if not sooner, and I'll give it to Jody. Jody, I would like you to circulate that to everybody. That's still a one-way communication. It's up to individual board members to decide if they want to give Jody direct feedback in advance of the meeting. And as long as you're going back to Jody, that's okay. And Jody, if you want to report that to me at our pre-meeting or not, that's up to you if you think you can do that. Okay, I don't want to run afoul of the Brown Act, but feedback is great here.
Why don't you establish a date for that feedback?
Well, I'm saying I'll have something to you guys. I'll get it done by the end of the day tomorrow. So to the extent that Jody can circulate the email, you'll have something by Monday.
Give us a week to respond
And
or several days.
what's our timing, Jody?
Yeah, our next hearing would be December 17th. So if you're able to get this to me on Friday, tomorrow, I mean, then people really have 2 weeks to review it.
Okay. I can get it out. Well, I might not have all the images, but the rest of it I'll have.
And we do have our pre-meeting is December 14th. So maybe that's a better deadline.
I would love to get any feedback then. Last year we had some last minute questions that were dicey and it required us to start redrafting things, and it just doesn't make for a better letter. I really want everybody's support of all things. I want this to be unanimous. I need everybody to feel good about it. So please speak up if you don't. Okay, anything else on this? Then thank you everybody for another long meeting. We are adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.
You all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.